Good morning to you. It's 6 o'clock on Friday, the 26th of January. Today,
Have blood on your hands. If you had just done your jobs properly, there's a very good chance my beautiful boy would be alive today.
the Attorney General is set to review the sentence of Nottingham killer Valdo Calacani following claims from the victims' families that he got away with murder.
Convicted murderer Kenneth Eugene Smith becomes the first death row inmate to be executed using nitrogen gas. That's in the state of Alabama.
And the price of rent outside the capital increases to almost £1,300 as London rents also reach record highs. We'll talk to a property expert this morning.
The hunt for justice. Ahead of Holocaust Memorial Day, we'll be hearing from two brothers who believe their father was a secret Nazi hunter.
And a new report reveals that children in the UK are some of the most addicted to social media apps in the world. Is it time to stop scrolling?
And Paul Coit is here with your sport.
Over in India, they're closing in on England's first innings total in the second day of the test. And in the cricket in Australia, in the tennis, I should say, not in the cricket. I'm getting my cricket and my tennis confused. Novak Djokovic, 2 sets down against Yannick Sinner, but it ain't over until a certain large lady starts to sing, and she's not making any noise at the moment. This is going to go a very long way, trust me.
That went on a very long time.
I know it did. I know it did, and I apologise.
Let's get a check on your weather this morning with Aidan McGibbon.
Following a turbulent week of weather, a drier weekend is expected for many of us, but not for all. Find the full details in the forecast coming up.
Good morning to you. I'm Stephen Dixon.
And I'm Anne Diamond, and this is Breakfast on GB News. And by the way, Happy Australia Day.
Is it really?
Yeah, 26th of Jan. It's
didn't
Australia
know.
Day. Yeah.
I'm afraid I've been rather excited about the 26th of January because it's the day that you can pre-order a certain mobile phone that I want.
For heaven's sake.
That I've been waiting for months.
So have you got your pre-order in already?
I haven't done it. I didn't realise it was the 26th till I just said 26 at the top
Yeah.
there. But now the penny has dropped and I shall be pre-ordering.
So what's so
today.
fantastic about this mobile phone?
Very, very thin, foldable. It's the size of an ordinary mobile phone closed, but it splits in half.
All right.
Very exciting. Do I look
But then
all
you have
right?
2 screens.
No, you're one big screen.
Oh, it opens up that
It's a
well, does
foldable,
it?
yeah.
Oh, I see. OK.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to seeing that.
Oh, I'd be
if you
very
pre-order
excited.
it, when do you get it?
In about a month, I think.
Oh, poor baby. You have
It's
to
all right.
wait.
I'll wait. It's be worth it. Do I look all right?
You do. He arrived this morning completely drenched.
Do you know what? It was fine because it's about half a mile to the car park. Would you believe? Half a mile. But anyway, I was walking it, and it was the last 50 yards the heavens opened, and I got drenched.
You did.
Absolutely drenched.
And it's funny because you were wearing a cream-coloured coat, and there were so many drip marks on you. You looked like a reverse Dalmatian.
Ah.
Oh, no, actually, no, the right sort of Dalmatian. That's right, because you were white underneath and then lots and lots of spots. Yeah. And hair dripping everywhere.
Wet.
Yeah, no, you've dried out quite well.
Thankfully, the studio is warm, so my trousers are still a bit wet. But we'll
teach you to have a brolly. You're going to have to be one of those city gents that always goes from the car to the office with a brolly.
A brolly and a bowler.
And a bowler, yeah.
It's not a bad idea. Look, there's lots to talk about this morning, and some of it, I have to say, is quite upsetting.
But it's also angry-making. What do I mean by that? It sort of infuriates you, I think, as well.
It just seems unfair. And it's about Valdo Calacani. They have blood on their hands. Those are the words of Barnaby Webber's mother as she described the sentencing of her son's killer to a psychiatric hospital rather than prison following attacks in Nottingham.
I'll never forget that awful day when we started to get the news. But, interestingly, politicians have listened, and the Attorney General is going to review the sentence of Valdo Calacani after the victims' families criticised the Crown Prosecution Service. They said he got away with murder.
Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. It is interesting, Catherine, that the world of politics has responded so quickly to this.
Yes, it is. Normally, politicians do not interfere in legal matters, but the outcry has been so enormous, hasn't it? Those horrific deaths in Nottingham last year, those young people, and Ian Coates, the caretaker, just about to start retirement, callously killed. And the man has been found guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, given that he was a paranoid schizophrenic. Now, what is going to happen now is because they're saying that the sentence is unduly lenient. This has gone to Victoria Prentice. She is the Attorney General. Now, she was a lawyer before she became a politician, and her legal team will look at what has happened. If they decide there's enough evidence that this perhaps was not the correct sentence, it will then be referred to the Court of Appeal, where judges will decide what to do next. So obviously, this is a train of events that's been set in motion. We don't know what the outcome will be, but politicians clearly are listening, and very clear, hearing the families speak yesterday, that they feel that they've been massively let down by the Crown Prosecution Service, by the NHS, and by the police. The Crown Prosecution Service originally had been going to try this man for murder, and the parents and Ian Coates's son weren't told anything different. They subsequently found out months later that the decision had been made to downgrade that to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. They said that they felt they'd been rushed, hastened and railroaded regarding that. And as you heard very clearly yesterday, Ian Coates' son said this man has made a mockery of the system and has got away with murder. Emma Webber, Barnaby Webber's mum, saying that he had, the fact that he had stockpiled weapons, that he knew what he was doing and that it was wrong, but he did it anyway. Also, potential failings within the NHS. This man needed medication. He'd been off his medication for about a year, and that had not been dealt with. And also, failures of the police. He had had several violent instances in the past. He'd been sectioned several times. He was wanted for a violent attack on a police officer some 9 months earlier, and yet the police had not arrested him, meaning that he was free to go on and commit these horrific killings.
I mean, if it were reviewed and they decided to bring murder charges instead, would there have to be a new trial? And anyway, it wouldn't really affect the outcome, would it? Because the judge has sentenced him to life in a psychiatric hospital. That would probably be true anyway if he were found guilty of murder. I mean, we all understand the reaction from the relatives, because clearly those 3 people were murdered appallingly. But it wouldn't affect the outcome, would it?
Well, potentially not, in that it looks like he will spend the rest of his life locked away. Of course, he will be locked away in a high security hospital, rather different to a prison. But of course, there is the potential that at some future point, decades down the line perhaps, if they consider that he is no longer a threat to society, there is the potential that he could be released. So yes, he will probably never come out of this high security hospital, but we don't know that categorically. And clearly the families feel too that this was premeditated. They feel that he knew what he was doing. And, they were told the other day in the court that the man before them was not being tried for murder. It was for manslaughter. And of course, manslaughter is the sort of thing you get convicted for if you're found guilty of dangerous driving. It's hardly on the same scale as somebody who got extra SIM cards, who hoarded weapons, who went about this in a systematic way. Hardly the same thing at all. So we will see what happens, but my goodness, your heart goes out to them. It's unimaginable, isn't it, what these families have been through. These two young people just finished their first year exams at university, and this older gentleman just about to start retirement. And the only thing was they all happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, it doesn't bear thinking.
No,
about,
it is
really.
heartbreaking, utterly heartbreaking.
Catherine, thanks very much indeed. Let's move on to our GB News People's poll, should we, which is interesting this week. Now, the Conservative Party, as we know, just on 20% support across Britain. So we were asking, who should replace Keir Starmer as, well, not leader of the party, but leader of the country when the time comes, or if he should be replaced at all? Well, you've spoken and you've chosen nobody.
Sorry, but that's just terrible, isn't it? I mean, is there... none of the above came out on top. 51% said they don't fancy Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, Penny Mordaunt or Suella Braverman to replace him. That's replacing Rishi Sunak, I presume.
Yeah, but I mean, interesting that of the people mentioned, Nigel Farage comes out on top. And, of course, Nigel is obviously not a Conservative.
And he's not an MP.
He's not an MP. Will he ever become an MP? I mean, it's comparatively unlikely, actually, the way these things work. Let's talk to political commentator Lettice Bromovsky, who joins us now. I mean, the one thing this highlights, Lettice, is that people are totally dissatisfied.
Yeah, completely. Exactly what you were saying just there. This is such resounding evidence from the public that they are just fed up. They want nothing more to do with the Conservative brand as it is right now. Like you say, there were 8 other people offered in that. And Nigel Farage came out on top, someone who is not a member of the Conservative Party, is not even currently a sitting MP. And all these people obviously sit under the sort of banner of conservatism, but they all have a really broad range of views within there. So again, I think it just really highlights that people are trying to distance themselves. I do think that the Nigel Farage coming out on top is particularly interesting because part of another poll that you did showed that the Reform Party is just 8 points behind the Conservatives right now. And although often it's very easy to look forward and be chasing that person in front of you, you do have to look back. And now I think the Conservatives will be thinking, what will happen if Nigel Farage chooses to join up with the Reform Party? Will that bolster them even further? Will that potentially put the Reform Party ahead of the Conservatives at the next general election?
It all comes down to seats, though, in the end. And Reform, no matter how popular they may prove to be, they're just not going to get enough seats to matter, are they?
Well, that is obviously the likelihood. And our system right now, first past the post, is not very beneficial for these smaller parties. But what will be very interesting is the Wellingborough by-election that's coming up next month, where we've seen the Reform Party on the ground. They've been fighting sort of tooth and nail. They were the first people there. They put their deputy leader, Ben Habib, there. And they are really looking to show people and prove that if they can not potentially win the seat, but show that they can command a strong majority, show that they are responsible enough for people to trust them, whether that will push them ahead in the polls in any way.
No, it's going to be interesting. Lettice, thanks very much indeed. The other question with this is, and it's whether it'll happen or not, I just don't know, but the idea that before an election, some Tories may defect to reform. Which, would that have an impact on it?
It wouldn't have enough of an impact, though, would it? That's the trouble.
No, but in terms of it giving reform more sort of credibility within our parliamentary system, it might do. Who knows? I mean, this election, it's why you need to stick with us here at GB News as your election channel, because it is going to be so fascinating to see. I wouldn't like to predict the outcome, apart from to say I think it's going to be a lot closer.
What could also, do you reckon? I wonder whether there'd be a big turnout or actually a very slow, disappointingly bad turnout.
I think bigger than a lot of people are saying.
Yes.
I think it could be fairly big. But I could be wrong.
I mean, we've got all sorts of headlines. We've got Jeremy Hunt promising more tax cuts. I mean, there's blatant beginnings of a general election nearing. And I just don't know how it will go down with us all us voters.
Maybe pound in our pocket is what really matters.
Well,
at the
that's
end of
what
the day.
politicians always reckon. When they do all the knocking on the doorstep, that's what they say is always the first. We think it's, you know, sort of journalistic type interesting stories like immigration. And while those things matter, apparently they don't matter nearly as much as basically the fact that people feel they haven't got enough money.
Well, do let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com.
So at 6:15, let's have a look at some of the other stories coming into the newsroom.
Diplomats from Britain and Canada have suspended trade talks because of a row over meat and cheese exports. The government spokesperson said Britain will only negotiate deals that deliver for its people, that's us. According to reports, the UK's trade relationship with the North American country is worse than before Brexit.
3 people have been arrested for allegedly posing as immigration lawyers helping through false asylum claims in Manchester. The Home Office has revealed that the suspects, including a married couple, charged over £3,000 per client for fake documents. Number 10 Downing Street says it'll be relentless in finding those abusing the immigration system for profit.
Shoplifting offences in England and Wales are at the highest level for 20 years. The Office for National Statistics says more than 400,000 offences were recorded in the year to September. That's up by a third. Number 10 says ministers are looking into how to tackle the problem.
Meanwhile, we're getting married. Fewer and fewer times. What do I mean? Less and less. The proportion of people who are either married or in civil partnerships has dropped below 50% for the first time, amid fears that the declining trend is bad news for the future of families. So for the first time...
You're all living over the brush.
Fewer than half of us are married. Yeah.
Disgraceful.
But I'll bet a lot of people are still sort of hooked up in some way.
Yes, yeah.
But isn't
Why
it...
not marry then?
Yes, exactly. Why are people not getting married anymore? Or not so much,
It
anyway.
does make a difference when you're married.
Do you think?
Well, I'm married.
And he's watching.
And he's watching.
Yes.
No, I think that does make it. I think it makes a difference.
They say nearly half of all teenagers do not live with both natural parents. Marriage may not be a panacea, but it stacks the odds in favour of stable families. Is it because more and more people do grow up in fragmented homes, you know, where either there's been a divorce or the parents live apart for some reason or something like that, and so they don't see marriage as the key to happy families?
But it does lead. I mean, this is where. I mean, all jokes aside, and you want a marriage to be happy, obviously. However, you more and more broken homes, and we're talking about knife crime yesterday, and you know, absent fathers and lack of role models and all these sort of things can make a difference. It does change society. I'm not saying everyone should be forced to get married and once you're married, stay together forever if it's not working out. But it does have impacts if we don't get married.
Oh, you've probably got the reason. Please let us know your view on this. gbviews@gbnews.com. Why are fewer and fewer people, and now it's less than half, why are fewer and fewer people getting married?
Now, let's talk money, because the average monthly rent outside of London has hit a record high, nearly £1,300 a month in the final quarter of 2023.
That's outside London. And this comes as London rents also hit a record high, surpassing £2,600 a month. And that's according to the property website Rightmove.
Grief.
But why? Why is there such a large surge in property prices?
Well, let's talk to property strategist Anna Claire Harper, who joins us now. Good to see you this morning. What is going on? I mean, I have to say that London figure terrifies me.
Yeah, and it sounds even worse when you think about the annual figures. It's about 15,000 for outside of London and about 28,000 for... Which,
and that's
for in London, 28,000, and that's before bills, compared with an average household income of about £32,000. So really, really not very affordable anymore. And what is going on is we have supply that's constrained and demand keeps growing because we have more households and a higher proportion of households renting.
But it defies belief, doesn't it? Because how on earth do you live if you're having to pay outside London £1,500 plus a month? Inside London, I don't know how anyone does it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. And I think that's what this data is trying to suggest is that the price growth is slightly slowing now, but it's still 9% on an annual basis, 9% of rental price growth, and this doesn't look like it's about to change in terms of the upward trend in rents in general, because, as I said, more people. We have more households, we have smaller households, an ageing population and immigration, which all add to population and the number of people who want to rent. And then within the population of households, we have more people who want to rent because of an affordability crisis, partly, and because of a lifestyle choice sometimes.
If you work out affordability, something like a rent of about £1,300 a month outside of London would require, for all the insurance and all the rest of it, would require an income of something like £35,000 a year to be classed as affordable.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so what do people on less than that do? What are they all doing? Living in bedsits?
It's a great question. There is a trend towards living in household groupings that you might not have.
Multiple
for example,
occupancy.
Multiple occupancy, or to the point that you were raising earlier, it's, it might be about children living longer with their parents, or it might be about staying with a partner longer than you ideally want to, for example, because it makes sense financially. There's lots of lifestyle choices that are impacted by this. Ultimately, it's a social problem, and it's also a business problem, because if people can't afford to move and live in the place where their work is or where job opportunities are, that's a big problem for businesses too. So this is a wide-ranging problem, and a lot of attention in the property market goes on kind of the premium new build houses, for example, but actually the bulk of the market is in the middle, and it's becoming very unaffordable.
I was going to ask you what the answer is. The problem is whenever we talk about these sort of things, all people say is build more houses. But it's not really an answer.
It's part of the solution, but it's not really relevant to this part of the problem. It's kind of a shiny penny, in fact. Really, the driver of this problem is that traditional landlords are selling because of tax changes, because of regulations, and now higher interest rates on average. And the result of that is that we have declining stock versus continued growing demand. We need to recapitalise the private rental market with institutional capital who have longer-term view, who can actually kind of afford to upkeep properties properly.
And not necessarily be reliant on a mortgage.
Not be reliant on a mortgage and not be short-term in their thinking. They can put a budget aside to make sure that things are replaced and maintained well, and you provide a good quality of housing. Yeah. So we need that kind of longer-term view in the rental sector, which up until now we haven't had.
Right.
It's a dismal outlook, isn't it?
It is dismal. It's frightening, actually. I find it frightening.
I just don't know how you do it.
No. Anna-Claire Harper, thanks very much indeed. If you're sort of trapped in all of that, let us know. gbviews@gbnews.com.
Well, that's right, because you are trapped. Because if you're having to pay that much and you're struggling to, how are you ever going to save enough to try and get on the housing ladder yourself?
You
can't.
You can't. What would you have to earn to afford £2,600 a month in London?
I mean, that's out of taxed income.
Yeah, you'd have to be on 50, 55,000.
You'd have to be, at least.
Which is
and
not
that's
a
every
small
penny.
wage.
That's every penny you earn will go out, either on just living, like groceries and things, or paying rent.
I think it's frankly terrifying. Anyway, if you're experiencing that, get in touch. We'd love to hear.
I'll bet you are if you're Bank of Mum and Dad.
Oh,
because you hear it a lot. I mean, at least 2 of my sons are thinking of moving out of London for the first time ever. But if I tell them that figure, they'll think, oh, crumbs, it's not much better outside London.
Don't know.
Well, it is better.
It's better. Anyway, let's see what the weather's going to do for you today.
It's wet. He knows
wet
it's
for
wet.
me this morning. Aidan McGivern has all the details.
Hello, good morning. It's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers in the far north today, where it will be blustery. Sunny skies for most elsewhere, a perfectly pleasant winter's day. Now, outbreaks of rain overnight, clearing first thing, and then blue skies for many, especially England and Wales. Just some patchy cloud there for Northern England and Northern Ireland. The odd shower for the north of Northern Ireland, but it's really across central and northern Scotland where the bulk of the showers will be, particularly through the morning with the odd rumble of thunder, some hail, some sleet and snow over the hills as well. And it's going to feel cold in a gusty wind. But further south, with sunny skies and lighter winds, 9 or 10 Celsius, feeling perfectly pleasant. Now into the evening, we keep the clear skies for long enough across southern and southeastern parts, and with light winds to lead to a touch of frost by dawn. Elsewhere, we've got increasing cloud once again, especially across Wales, northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and outbreaks of rain and a wind turning up by dawn. So that will keep things milder in the north, but a chilly start further south. However, that's where the best of the sunshine will be first thing across the Midlands, East Anglia and southern England. Northern Scotland, meanwhile, sees some very strong winds during the morning on Saturday, with 60, 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts and some heavy rain lingering across the far north, especially for Caithness, Sutherland and Lewis. Elsewhere, many places will be dry, fair amounts of cloud about, but feeling pleasant enough in any sunny spells.
Well, there you go. That's your weather for you today. Right, we've got plenty to talk about. Love to hear from you about your thoughts on marriage and why fewer than... It's less than half, isn't it? And fewer than... God knows how many. Less than half people in the UK are now married. That's the first time the rate of marriage has ever fallen so far down.
It's a bit worrying.
Why is it happening? GB Views, gbnews.com.
And we're also going to be taking you to the States to talk about Alabama executing an inmate using nitrogen gas for the first time. And it's proving to be controversial. We'll bring you more in just a moment.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 6:28 now. Alabama death row inmate Kenneth Smith has become the first American, in fact, the first person in the world to be executed using nitrogen gas.
The state has called it the most painless and humane method of execution known to man.
But a witness described it as horrific and the worst thing he'd ever seen.
Former advisor to Clinton and Bush administration, Steve Gill, joins us now. Hello there, Steve. I must say, we're all in a bit of shock about it here in the UK, having found out that it's happened overnight and that it was done in this way. What's your reaction?
You know, there were about 200 people executed across the states last year, most by lethal injection. And the irony about this particular one is that they tried to execute this particular guy. And again, we're looking 30 years after he murdered an innocent pastor's wife. He and another man were paid $1,000 each to kill her. They beat her and stabbed her over 8 or 9 times. And 30 years later, he's just now reaching justice. his co-partner was executed in 2010 by lethal injection. Now, Mr. Smith, they had tried to administer a lethal injection about 2 years ago and ended up jabbing him with the needle 3 or 4 times. At one point, asked him if he would clench his fist so that they could put the IV into his arm, and he refused, probably forcefully. So that did not work, and they've come back now and tried this, put the gas mask over his face, put this new nitrogen oxide into his lungs, and he passed away. The whole process was about 20 minutes.
Why is this proving to be so controversial with people when, frankly, as I keep saying here in the studio, people don't seem to bat an eyelid about the electric chair in America, and that is far from humane, actually, isn't it? I mean, that's quite a horrific process.
Well, and this one is supposed to be cleaner and easier than lethal injection and the other forms. Most of the people who are objecting, who are calling it the most horrific thing they've ever seen, are people who oppose any form of execution, whether they're using the needle that essentially puts you to sleep and then you never wake up, or whether they use this gas that's supposed to put you unconscious in less than a minute or two. Most of the opposition is people who would oppose any form of execution, and that's why they've come to this one. They oppose the lethal injection form. They've opposed the electric chair. There are some states that are considering bringing back the firing squad, figuring that comes quicker. I don't think that's the right choice.
I mean, and everybody is wondering, why don't prisons, if they're going to carry out an execution, use the same sort of method used by doctors when they do legally assisted suicides, for instance, in Switzerland and elsewhere? I mean, surely it can be done with more dignity.
I would think so. And again, the opposition to any form is part of what's triggering this. There's a limit on the types of drugs that can and have been used, because there are some that argue that even if they go quietly and pass to sleep and then pass away, that we can't judge the pain they might be experiencing when they're unconscious. But I'm with you, Anne. We have all probably had pets that we've experienced having to put down, and there's nothing that seems painful in that process. I'm not sure why we can't find a peaceful and loving process to carry out these executions the way we do with our pets.
Is there an element of revenge in this? I mean, maybe we don't care, or we want such an offender to suffer.
I think they do suffer in anticipation. This particular Mr. Smith apparently yesterday was not hungry, didn't have an appetite, was refusing food. Finally, he ate his last meal, which was a steak covered in A1 sauce. But he was resisting all the way, which you would expect. And he was, as his own pastor was saying, was really having a tough time coming to the likely imminent end of his life. The son of the pastor's wife who passed, who was there to observe it, he wanted to see that it went through this time, said that there was no compassion for her when they beat her to death and stabbed her to death. And I don't think there's a revenge element, but I think as they anticipate the end of their life, perhaps they do come to some, kind of moral clarity.
Okay. Gosh. Steve, thanks very much indeed. It's grim.
It is grim, isn't it?
OK, this is Breakfast with Stephen and Anne. It is 6:33. Let's just remind you of our top stories.
You have blood on your hands. If you had just done your jobs properly, there's a very good chance my beautiful boy would be alive today.
The Attorney General is going to review the sentence of Nottingham killer Valdo Calicani following claims from the victim's family that he got away with murder.
The hunt for justice. Ahead of Holocaust Memorial Day, we'll be hearing from two brothers who believe that their father was actually a secret Nazi hunter.
And a new report has revealed that children in the UK are some of the most addicted to social media in the world. We're going to be debating whether it's time to stop scrolling.
I'd love to know how you're going to do that.
Easier said than
youngsters, getting you to stop scrolling would be something.
I'm not on social media.
You are?
Well, yes, but I don't really go on it much myself.
Do you know, people say that, don't they? I wonder if they're... Oh, do you think I wonder if you could calculate how many hours you spend on it. Actually, your phone will tell you how many hours you spend on it.
I honestly don't really... If you message me, I reply to some things, but it's my other half who does it.
Oh, you have a man who can?
I have a man who can.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Because I'm just not very good, and I'm not that interested in social media. But if there are interesting messages, I do look at them. They are brought to my attention. So if I reply to you, it's from me. But there you go. Paul Coyte's here. Off your phone, Coyte. Paul.
Sorry. I'm just checking out scores.
Oh, yes, please.
It wasn't anything to do with social media or anything else. I was just checking out scores because there's so much going on. We've got the cricket going on and the tennis at the moment.
Yeah. Tell us the tennis first, because I want to know how Novak's getting on.
OK. Now, listen, before I do this, I think you've won me over slightly with Novak, because I felt kind of bad yesterday because we were saying that we didn't like Novak Djokovic, and you were, like, coming to his defence, weren't you?
Yeah.
And you know what? And you seem surprised, but I've kind of turned towards Novak a little bit.
Why? What's changed?
Well, he did the interview with Nick Kyrgios, which was pretty funny, and I thought that was quite witty. And then he was very good when we showed the clips of him before the Australian Open having some fun with people. So I'm beginning to warm to him.
Yeah, you see, and the other players.
There is a personality there, but he is the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest tennis player that's ever played. So Jannik Sinner, 22-year-old Italian, so he's playing against him in the semi-final. First set, Sinner 6-1, all over Djokovic.
6-1.
Second set, Sinner wins that 6-2. So then I'm looking about 15 minutes ago, maybe less. Sinner has match point against Djokovic. Look at your face. I've never seen the face like this. All the years I've been watching you, I've never seen that face. So anyway, he's match point. And then, in Djokovic style, Novak turns it around and wins the tiebreak. So it's now 2-1 to Sinner.
Right.
And as I mentioned...
They're now playing the fourth set.
Well, they are now playing the fourth set, and I think, the smart money is going to be on Novak.
Yes, he's done it before.
Of course, he's done it
big
so many times
can
before.
Turn things around completely, can't
But that's it. But you think 2 sets and match point as well. And this is the sign of great champions. They never, ever give up, right to the very end. So a few words about Jannik Sinner, and he's the one with the Carota boys, the Carrot fans. We spoke about them, didn't we? So basically, his fans.
Who are you confusing me with?
Jannik Sinner. Yeah, Jannik Sinner. He's got these fans. I don't know if we've got the pictures. I think we've got something of the fans. They're called the Carrot Boys, and they travel around the world watching Jannik Sinner play. Now, there they are. Now, they're huge Jannik Sinner fans.
Why are they dressed as carrots?
Well, there's a few reasons for this. The reason...
He's a bit ginger.
Well, this is what I think. They say that the reason they dress as carrots is because during a game in 2019, Sinner, instead of having, barley water, Robinson's barley water or whatever, he ate a carrot, and they said, hey, we would dress as carrots, but it just seems a bit of a coincidence that Jannik Sinner does have ginger hair. So maybe that's what it is. So they're getting very excited. Also, Jannik Sinner was an accomplished skier as well. And he had a choice of either becoming a professional skier or a professional tennis player.
Oh, he's obviously very good.
Yeah,
this far.
Often sports people can do it.
He got match point and didn't get it.
But it was during the tiebreak, and it was on Djokovic's serve as well. So
One game each in the fourth set.
It's going to be
30-15.
Very, very intriguing.
And down there in Australia, it's Australia Day.
It is.
Yeah.
So good day.
So what's happening in the cricket?
Cricket is it's interesting.
That good.
When I try and explain Test matches, it's England batted anyway. OK, yesterday we spoke about that. 246 all out. Ben Stokes scored 70. India are currently 222 for 3. They're 24 runs behind. It's lunch. It's going to be long. The pitch is dry. The ball is not doing much. It's a batter's wicket. So I think India are going to score big. But it's going to be a very long 5 days, I think, for England in India at the moment.
What's a batter's wicket?
Well, it's pretty...
I know, I shouldn't have asked, should I?
No, I'm glad you did. That's the reason I put it in there.
Cricketing explanations.
We were talking with Monty Panesar yesterday about turning wickets and batting wickets. Basically means that if the ball is not flying off all over the place, and it would suit the batsman. So basically, if you're a batsman, the ball, it's easier to hit than it would be if it was a bowler's wicket.
2-1 to Sinner.
Oh, is it? OK, fine.
Fourth set.
Right, OK. Live over And that's the latest score. By the way, the other semi-final,
yeah.
which is Alexander Zverev and Daniil Medvedev. And I've worked out my own fact for that, because I always love to see facts. I think it's the most Vs ever seen in an Australian Open semi-final.
So
Medvedev and Zverev. And Zverev and Medvedev.
Oh, gosh, that's
so more Vs than anywhere else. Yeah, absolutely. Got a quick word on the Nick Dunlap? Can we do that?
Very quickly.
Very quick word on Nick Dunlap. Nick Dunlap, the first amateur golfer to win on the PGA Tour. He won in 30 years. So he won the American Express Open, which was at the weekend. He won $1.5 million, except the fact that he's an amateur, which means he's not allowed to collect the money.
What?
So the money, because he's an amateur.
That's outrageous.
So guess what? Yesterday, he turned professional, but it's too late for the $1.5 million. Yeah. What a nightmare. Can you imagine?
I think that's really unfair.
So do I. Yeah. But if you're amateur status, can't take the money. But the worst thing is it goes to the guy who came second.
No.
You think he would then go, you know what?
Yeah.
Between us.
Yeah.
But
At least,
I don't think that's going to happen, because if I was second, I don't think I would do that.
Well, no, I wouldn't, but
I know you wouldn't, yeah.
Paul, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. We've got the papers heading your way in just a moment.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
6:42, good morning to you. Let's see what's making the news for you today with the editor of Spike, Tom Slater, and PR expert, Lara Fawcett. Good morning to you both. Nice to see you. Tom, let's start with the Telegraph, should we? What's going on with Vodafone?
So Vodafone, their biggest shareholder, is now the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, which has prompted this intervention from Oliver Dowden, the Deputy Prime Minister. He has referred to this as a threat to national security, not least because of the fact that Vodafone also own a lot of critical infrastructure, undersea cables and things of that nature.
Is Vodafone sort of previously seen as a British company?
I don't think it's a British company originally,
exactly.
but I think it's something which, as with many of these firms, obviously so many of the not just their own kind of services, but the sort of general infrastructure is something which is relied upon more broadly. And so this has raised concerns. He suggested kind of certain special measures, I think in particular. This is the thing about interventions like this. On the one hand, it sounds quite kind of sabre-rattling. It's a threat to national security, something must take place. And then you look at what's actually being proposed, and there has to be a committee that will oversee these things. And there has to be some sort of mechanism and so on. So it's something where often the bark is more significant than the bite. But the context for this, and I think why the Telegraph is certainly leading with it today, is the fact that there is this UAE-led bid to buy out the Telegraph as well, which by some of the comment pieces and some of the news pieces that the Telegraph have been publishing recently, they're not best pleased about. So there's that general sense of not only questions of critical infrastructure, but also some of our key institutions, journalistic or otherwise, being owned by foreign autocratic
But we're right to
states.
be monitoring this, aren't we, carefully?
Oh, completely.
Otherwise, it could be by stealth. You know, we could find all sorts of countries that we may once have considered friends, but not always, taking over and then becoming major shareholders in critical tech, particularly.
No, completely. And you can understand why there's going to be that concern about it. I guess the question is, what does the correct kind of action look like? Do you deprive these companies of investment that they're clearly quite desperately needing? Or do you... And also, if you are going to introduce measures, is this kind of little committee or things of this nature actually going to cut it? But as you're right, it's completely understandable there will be concerns, particularly when it's not just one acquisition, it's not just one takeover, it's the fact that all across the piece you have particular investment funds linked to particular autocratic states owning quite a large share of what are quite important British-based businesses.
It's interesting that this is reported in the Daily Telegraph as well, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Dear me, what do you make of it, Lara?
Well, it would worry me with everything being such a tinderbox in the Middle East, having more business out there.
But we can't have everything with British infrastructure just being British, can we?
Why not?
Well, because we don't seem to have the money.
No, that's true.
Which is the problem. It'd be lovely if we could. Anyway, let's have a look at fighting a war. This is in the Star this morning, because there's all this talk of would there be conscription and all the rest of it, which has been ruled out by the PM. But 90% of us say we wouldn't fight for Britain.
I know, it's interesting, isn't it? So it says here, 90% of Brits say they'd refuse to fight in a war for Britain, and their claims we're too fat anyway. So maybe bring back rationing, stop people being fat for a start.
Bring back national service, a lot of people are saying, aren't
Very
they?
sensible. I do agree with that.
Do you really?
But the army thing, this was interesting. I was having a little look when I was in the green rooms. They were saying within 2 years that there's going to be fewer than 68,000 regulars in the army, and to deter an invader, we need 500,000 recruits.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And I think times have changed. We've had 70 years now since we had a last major war. And, yeah, I mean, it is a worry that people aren't... the army are going to have to change their recruitment policy. Like
But it's money. Again,
Of course
it all boils down to money.
Everything's money.
But we need to prioritise the armed forces a lot more, don't we? I mean, what's the old saying? You know, to prepare for peace, you have to prepare for war.
I read that this morning, yeah. And also, people have got to feel patriotic pride. I'm not sure that this younger generation, Gen Z, have got the pride that the past generations had.
They've been taught, or they've been
to be
encouraged
ashamed of the
think,
past.
to be ashamed
absolutely.
of being British
Yeah.
and of our past. And now we're reaping the rewards of that. But also, we've become complacent. I've done so many interviews over the years with armed force leaders and politicians who say, oh, the next war's not going to be anything like the last war. The next war's going to just be fought on computers and things like that. Honestly, people have said that time and again.
Well,
and it'll be
now
fought...
look at Russia.
Yeah, it'll be fought by drones that will be operated from, you know, the Atacama Desert or something. It's not happening like that, is it? Look at Russia and Ukraine. Look at Israel and Gaza. It's back to
proper
back to blood and guts and civilians and all the rest of it. And we're not prepared for that because we've allowed ourselves to become...
I agree. One amusing thing I read was that about the army are changing their tattoo policy. They're now letting people in, they're recruiting people with tattoos, so that might frighten the opposition.
No, but I tell you what, we mentioned this yesterday. That's got to be nonsense, because you'd never meet a soldier who hasn't got a tattoo.
So where is that? No, they're talking about facial tattoos and tattoos that may be obscene or deliberately frightening.
Great.
And deliberately frightening.
That's what you want, isn't it?
Bring it on.
Yeah.
Bring it on. That's what I say.
If they're willing to fight and be trained to fight, then let them in, I think.
Tom, we're going to get more tax cuts, apparently. Jeremy Hunt's preparing to trap Labour with all of this.
Yeah, so we've heard for a good few weeks now that the Tories are planning to introduce some tax cuts ahead of the next election.
Yeah, they better add, otherwise the expectation management's damaged.
Exactly, something's gone very wrong if that's not actually what's going to happen. It seems like this is their kind of last-ditch attempt to get on the right side of the electorate. I hope that people will start to see a bit more in their pay packets as they go to vote. And a warning here from an unnamed senior Labour figure suggesting that Starmer can't fall into this trap of trying to match these tax cuts because of the state that the public finances are in, and because of the fact that on public services he's going to want to deliver. Obviously, I suppose you can see the argument for this looking at the polls in particular, which is there's not an overwhelming appetite for tax cuts, shall we say. Public services tend to come high. Even amongst 2019 Tory voters, their priorities tend to be things other than tax cuts at this point, whether it's immigration, cost of living, inflation, things of this matter.
Yeah, but it's a very bad move if the Labour Party policy is ultimately going to be, on day one, we're going to put your taxes up.
And also there is that thing about what people might tell a pollster and what, when it comes to election day, and they're thinking, you know what, I have seen that extra bump recently, do I want to jeopardise that? But it's interesting, in the Eye, they've also got a little analysis piece from Paul Lewis from Radio 4, who makes the point that even if Jeremy Hunt actually eyes a kind of cut in 1% cut in income tax or something like that, that you're talking about somewhere in the region of 6 or 7 billion. And yet, in terms of these stealth taxes, as they're called, freezing the tax thresholds, therefore more people have been dragged into higher tax brackets, it dwarfs that amount. So it's the sort of thing where they've essentially, because the tax burden is so high at this point, not least because of some of these stealth taxes, the government would effectively be giving you back a little bit of the large amount that they've already taken. Yeah. But again, memories are quite short sometimes when you go into the polling booth. So it's finely balanced, I think, in terms of what will actually make a difference.
I think it's all spin. It's all spin.
It's all they've got at this point.
But it does put Keir Starmer... well, he can't sit on the fence on this, can he? He's got to say something about tax now.
He does, but his fence-sitting is his kind of natural stance, unfortunately, so I don't know how it's going.
Not an election campaign, but...
He has tried to turn... There's that old kind of truism about elections that oppositions don't win them, incumbent governments lose them. He's tried to turn that into an entire philosophy. He tries to say absolutely nothing. Occasionally, when he has tried to make a kind of a big policy announcement, the 28 billion green investment and so on, he's forced to back down from it a few weeks later. I do wonder whether that's going to work for him. I don't think that it's unlikely. I think it's very likely he's still going to win the next election, but will it be as convincing as the polls suggest, given there's so little clarity as to what it is he actually wants to do? I'm not too sure.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting. Should we talk about marriage, Lara?
Favourite subject.
Is it? Really? Why? Is there...
I've been married for nearly 30 years. I think it's the bedrock of our society. There's been many times my husband would say the same, whereas if we hadn't been married, he'd have left me or I'd have left him. You need marriage for children. If you're not having children, that's a different argument. I think for children, the security it gives. What was fewer than half
of British adults
figures, isn't it?
are married or in a civil partnership.
Yeah.
And it's the first time it's fallen down
including
below
same-sex marriage, which I thought was interesting. You'd have thought it might have gone up. So it really is a big decline.
But what would you say to someone like Jen, then, who's been in touch? Says, we've been together for 40 years, 3 children, 8 grandchildren. It was my decision not to marry. However, I feel after road testing him, I'd quite like to marry him, but it's too expensive.
It's about the money. You can just go into a church and get a priest. You know, I'm a devout Catholic, so I come from that stance that I think it's just a beautiful institution. It's not to say it's perfect, but if with society you don't start with this is how ideally it should be. We should never go back to the days where you chastise and punish people for being single mothers. I'm not saying that at all. But if it's not the blueprint, so if someone says, when they're not married, I'm having a baby, of course, you know, you're going to say lovely and all the rest of it, but to celebrate it... someone very close to me at the moment is having a baby and they are getting married next week. And I was so happy to hear it. They're having the baby in May and they're getting married next week because they feel it's really, really important to... They say, if we can't commit to each other, then why...
I've heard so many people say, we're not getting married because it's just too expensive.
Oh, rubbish.
You think, why does it have to be expensive?
No,
that's what the problem is?
People getting married for the wrong reasons.
Wrong reasons.
Just party.
Yes. Just go the two of you and, you know, say your vows and get married.
Do you fancy popping the question at any point, Tom?
It's none of your business, Steve. No, but it is interesting, isn't it? Because on the one hand, as you say, the arguments that are made as to why people aren't getting married, I think the financial one seems the least convincing because that's always going to be a bit of a problem, isn't it? I mean, and also the fact that, you know, you don't have to have a fabulously expensive wedding. That's not a requirement.
But people seem to think they do.
And there is a bit of keeping up with the Joneses that goes on. I do understand that. But I do just wonder if it's... this does just seem to be the direction of travel. I don't know what anyone can do to try to reverse it necessarily, culturally.
It is the glue, but it is also the security. I mean, I was lucky my parents were happily married, but I knew as a child that they would never, ever leave each other, because I just knew that. It was just... And it gave me such security, just knowing...
I think that's important.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also that, you know...
Emily says, morning Emily, what difference does it make being married? I wish I hadn't married that idiot. I could have walked away and not looked back instead of having to go through a very expensive and long drawn out nasty divorce.
OK, we're just going to leave you two just for the time being because we want to talk to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Gareth Davies, who joins us now. Just a very brief chat with you, Mr Davies. What's all this about more tax cuts on the way? I mean, how guaranteed is all of that?
Well, good morning. Great to see you and be with you in this on this very windy day today. Look, today we're cutting taxes for 27 million people with the national insurance cuts. People can go in there on their pay slips and go on the HMRC tool to see how much extra they're getting. An average earner of about 35,000 a year will see around £450 extra on their pay slips this year. And we always keep taxes under review, but we've been very clear that when we can do so, when we can do so responsibly, we want to get taxes down. We've got a budget coming up on the 6th of March. We'll see where we are ahead of that. But clearly today we've demonstrated that when we can cut taxes with inflation down from 11% of a peak to 4%, we can put more money back in people's pockets. And that's exactly what we're doing today.
The public reaction, though, seems to be that, oh, this is just blatant electioneering. We're not going to be fooled and we're not going to believe promises.
I think when people look at their pay slips, they'll be pleased that they've got more money in their pocket. And as I say, when we can do so, we will go further with tax cuts and we'll do it responsibly. We have a clear plan when it comes to reducing inflation. We've done that from 11 to 4%, which has enabled us to cut taxes today for the 27 million people, and we'll continue to press on with that plan. If you look at the alternative, the Labour Party have no plan. They take us back to square one. We know what happens with the economy under a Labour government. Under this government, we are acting today for the 27 million people, and we want to continue that.
But as you say, I mean, it's interesting that you wanted today to push the fact that people have got more money in their pay packets. What for the average earner, 35 quid, maybe give or take, not to be sniffed at, but it's hardly going to change the world, is it?
Well, since 2010, it's important to point out, we've actually brought 3 million people out of paying any tax at all because we've increased the personal threshold. So you can now earn £1,000 in this country and pay no tax at all. And we wanted, through the last autumn statement, to really reward work. National insurance contributions is a tax on work and workers, and so we wanted to cut that by 2p, which we've done today, and people can go into their pay slips, into their systems and look at the amount of money that they have. As I say, when we can responsibly do so, we will continue to cut taxes. That's what a Conservative government does, but we've got to stick with a plan to keep inflation coming down. As I say, it's gone from 11% to 4%. That's a great achievement, but we've got to keep going further, and that will enable us to cut taxes further later in the year.
We've got to leave it there. Gareth Davies, thank you.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Morning to you. It's 7 o'clock on Friday, the 26th of January. Today.
You have blood on your hands. If you had just done your jobs properly, there's a very good chance my beautiful boy would be alive today.
The Attorney General set to review the sentence of Nottingham killer Valdo Calacani following claims from the victim's family that he got away with murder.
I'm Catherine Forster, political correspondent here in Westminster, where Victoria Prentice, the Attorney General, now has 28 days to decide whether to refer the sentencing to the High Court.
Convicted murderer Kenneth Eugene Smith becomes the first death row inmate to be executed using nitrogen gas. That's in the United States.
The price of rent outside of the capital has increased to almost £1,300 a month. London rents are double that.
The hunt for justice ahead of Holocaust Memorial Day. We'll be hearing from two brothers who believe that their father was actually a secret Nazi hunter.
And a new report reveals that children in the UK are some of the most addicted to social media in the world. We're debating, is it time to stop scrolling?
And Paul Coit is here with your sport.
And I've got to tell you, Novak's teetering on the edge. 4-2 down in the third set, in the fourth set now. 2 sets to 1 down. Could be going out of the Australian Open, but never count out Djokovic. Still going ahead.
Lovely stuff. Thank you. Aidan McGivern's got your weather.
Following a turbulent week of weather, a drier weekend is expected for many of us, but not for all. Find the full details in the forecast coming up soon.
Morning to you. I'm Stephen Dixon.
And I'm Anne Diamond, and this is Breakfast on GB News.
Colin's all for marriage.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So, Colin, I don't know why. The first one lasted 24 years, grew apart. Second one lasted 5 years, was OK, but the candle blew out quickly. Third one is going strong.
Yay.
8 years in May. Third time lucky, and she's a nurse. That's just what you want.
What do you mean by just what you want?
Well, looking after him.
Yeah,
He's been knocking on a bit now, Colin.
That's what I don't like. I like all the previous things he said.
Oh, do you?
But yeah, no, you've landed a nurse. Really?
I think, well, he's been a bit sarky, I guess.
I think so.
Keith says marriage is too cheap to get into and far too expensive to get out of. I think the problem with marriage is that too many people go in it for the wrong reasons, to be perfectly honest.
What reasons do they go in it for?
I don't think they're properly in love. I think they might think, oh, this'll do. This is the best I'm going to manage, or it's time I want to have children now, so I'll go into it.
Well, that's a good reason to get married,
No,
as long
it's
as
not.
both people think of it that way.
Yeah, but you've still got to manage when the children aren't there, haven't you?
Well, that's why a lot of marriages do hit the rocks once the children are a certain age and maybe gone. Not that children sort of go anymore, but then you've got two people who've got to learn to live together. But it's a very complicated institution, isn't it? Very difficult. Chris says people aren't getting married because of costs. I was born in the mid-80s, happen to be married now, but the majority of my friends are struggling with sharing rooms because of housing stock.
Yeah.
I think that's a big problem too, although you could argue that getting married to somebody, at least there are two of you living under one roof, and that should make it cheaper.
And it doesn't have to be expensive. If you're really in love, you don't have to have a big party.
Just nip down your local church.
You should just get married.
Or to the registry office.
Yeah.
And just have a quick do.
Anyway.
Pint in the pub afterwards. Doesn't have to be expensive, does it?
Doesn't have to be.
I was telling you that a while ago that I was in a taxi and the taxi driver was talking about working all the time because he was trying to make enough money to afford the wedding. And I said, how much are you going to spend on the wedding? He said, well, it's my fiancée, she wants a big wedding. And 35 grand he was working towards the wedding fund. And I said, but you could actually put down a deposit on a house for that. And he said, yeah, but she wants a big wedding.
Yeah, they want to be a princess for the day. Which is ridiculous.
I was going to say go to Disney World, but that's quite expensive too.
Yeah, not 35 grand.
No.
Anyway, let us know what you think. Maybe we're being too old-fashioned. I don't know.
But why? Yeah, I mean, the question is that there's
we
this
had
new
a small
report out.
wedding. And it was
You spent
lovely.
a lot of money on it, though, didn't you?
It did add up to a fair bit, but it was still an intimate. It was an intimate occasion. It wasn't a great big showy thing.
No, we had a very small wedding too.
Anyway, let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, we're looking at what is a hugely distressing situation for the families involved. Those 3 people, 2 youngsters and an older caretaker about to retire, who were killed in Nottingham last year.
Terrible morning. I'll never forget the morning. We were
awful.
We were presenting the programme here and
trying to get to grips with what was going
on, and gradually you realised that it happened in a student area, and the growing fear was that the 2 young people who'd been attacked might be students, and of course they turned out to be 2 lovely young people who did not deserve what they'd got.
Oh, absolutely not.
And then a caretaker, school caretaker, who was about to retire, wasn't he?
Yeah, but anyway, I mean, Valdo Kalakani has been sentenced to convicted of manslaughter.
Convicted of manslaughter.
So be in a psychiatric hospital rather than a prison convicted of murder. Well, the families are furious, understandably so. Let's talk to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. So the Attorney General, Catherine, is looking into this. What can she do?
Yes, so Victoria Prentice is the current Attorney General. She and her legal team have got 28 days to look into this. If they decide that they think the sentence was unduly lenient, which is what has been alleged, they can then refer this case to the Court of Appeal. It would then be for judges to decide what to do, if anything. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, speaking yesterday in North Yorkshire, said that this was a very dangerous individual, was pressed on whether there should be a public inquiry, didn't back calls for that. But absolute outrage there has been, hasn't there? And incredibly emotional scenes yesterday, hearing the parents of Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar speak, and the son of Ian Coates, these 3 people killed in the most horrific circumstances on that dreadful morning in Nottingham. The families clearly believe that they have been massively, massively let down. Now, James Coates, Ian Coates' son, said this man has made a mockery of the system and has got away with murder. Now, various alleged failings by the Crown Prosecution Service and by the NHS, and indeed by the police in terms of the sentencing. The families understood that he would be charged with murder, and it was only some 5 months later that they had a brief Zoom meeting at which they were basically told that they didn't think this would stand up, and instead he was going to be charged with manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility because he was a paranoid schizophrenic. Now, they said, Emma Webber, Barnaby's mother, said they felt they'd been rushed, hastened and railroaded. They clearly were not kept in the loop about this at all. She also said that he knew entirely that it was wrong, but he did it anyway. Also questions for the police, why he hadn't been arrested given he'd assaulted a police officer months earlier. And for the NHS, he'd been sectioned several times, but he'd been out in the community not taking his medication. So it looks like huge questions have now to be asked, but of course nothing can bring back those 3 innocent people senselessly killed that morning in June last year.
Indeed. Catherine, thank you.
Right, it's 9 minutes past 7. Let's talk about a GB News People's poll. Interesting, actually quite fascinating results. Only 20% of Britons support the Conservative Party. We sort of knew that. So we asked who should replace Rishi Sunak as leader when the time comes.
Well, you chose nobody. Yes, none of the above came out on top. 51% said they don't fancy Suella Braverman, Penny Mordaunt, Boris Johnson, or, inexplicably, Nigel Farage.
Although he did come out top of the meagre amount of votes afforded to anyone.
I sort of don't know why he was on the list, because he's not in the Conservative Party and he's never going to lead the Conservative Party, so it seems a little bit odd. Let's talk to former Labour advisor and associate editor of Labour Uncut, Kevin Marr, and former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall. Kevin, let's start with you. I mean, who to lead the Conservative Party? Well, number 1 on the list, not a Conservative Party member for a kick-off. It's all very odd.
It is all very odd. I think what it also reflects is that voters, particularly, I think, Conservative voters, are pretty cheesed off. A lot of them still hankering after the days of Boris Johnson. Many of them, I suspect, hankering after the days of Margaret Thatcher. And see everybody else on the field as pretty inadequate. So there's not an awful lot of enthusiasm there for anybody. Penny Mordaunt's name keeps popping up. She went for the leadership last time around. She has some support clearly, but a lot of influential Conservatives don't seem to like her. So we're in the phase, I think, now where people are starting to look past the next general election and say what happens to the Conservative Party at that point. So it's also partly a reflection of the state of the government. It's running out of life force. It's on borrowed time, and people are starting to think what happens after Rishi Sunak, which is pretty damaging and devastating for him.
Yeah, Claire, I mean, despite all the Westminster gossip about those who might be in line for Rishi Sunak's job, it looks as though he can hold on to it for a bit longer, doesn't he? But maybe just until the next general election.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it would be utterly bonkers to try and get rid of one prime minister because you don't like them and put in somebody else. And it almost seems like anybody else at the moment. It doesn't help that the party is going around putting up preferred candidates. It depends which wing of the party you look at as to which candidate that is. And it just makes the Conservative Party look weak and divided. The country is fed up with that. I think that is quite evident from every single poll coming out, and especially the GB News poll, where 51% of people say that they would prefer none of the above. I think that's quite telling. It's just that it seems very tired. It seems like there's no ideas, but Rishi Sunak will indeed lead us into the general election. What happens after that is going to be a matter for the party. It depends how many seats we retain, and it depends who is there and who is willing to lead the opposition, which I have worked in opposition. It is a very, very long slog. It is very hard. And when you've been in power for 14 years, opposition is going to feel very, very different and quite sad.
It's interesting, though, isn't it, Claire? When you look at, I mean, the lists we've got there are big players. I mean, admittedly, Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage are not MPs, and so Nigel isn't even in the Conservative Party. So, I mean, make of that what you will. But they're still all big players, and none of them polling very well. So it does beg the question, is the Conservative Party now going to be forced to look for a new generation?
Yes, it probably is. And you know what? That's not a bad thing. I think you need to look at who you have on the back benches, because they will bring a different support group and they will have different ideas. And what is evident is whatever the party is putting forward, whatever the government is proposing, isn't cutting through with the electorate. So it's not a bad thing to have somebody new, somebody that no one's ever heard of. And I'm sure that we will all go looking for those people saying, well, who are they? But they will be the next person. We saw that with the likes of Margaret Thatcher. And in fact, in Tony Blair's time, he sort of came through and everyone went, well, who is this man? And then he became a leader very successfully for 3 terms. So it isn't a bad thing. It might be the regeneration the Conservative Party needs.
Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think
Sorry,
Claire's
Kevin.
absolutely right. Absolutely, I think Claire's right. And the Conservative Party, historically, a bit like Doctor Who, it regenerates itself with a change of personality, and often skips a generation and looks at actually how you reconnect as quickly as possible. I mean, the Tory Party is a fascinating organisation and institution. I can always say that about it. That it is focused on power. It's focused on, when it's not in power, getting back in power. So you look at 1997, for example, the wipeout, the New Labour wipeout in 1997. What did the Tory Party do? It went to William Hague, 36 years of age, junior member of the cabinet, to be its next leader. So they are pretty ruthless at being able to say, if people are associated with the past, we'll chop them out and we'll cut the way back down to a new figure to take us forward. So the next leader of the Conservative Party possibly isn't even on that list.
Oh, well. Good to see you both this morning. Yeah, with those figures, let's hope.
Yeah.
I hadn't realised that he was only 36, William Hague, when he became leader of the Conservative Party. I mean, he seemed quite old to me at the time.
He's
but that
always
was
seemed a
quite
bit
young.
old. Even when he was young, he seemed a bit old, didn't he? But he's become a sort of elder statesman now.
Oh, he has.
And very, very well respected.
He's a very good public speaker, actually. Very funny.
I tell you what, you talk about parties when they're in opposition is a chance to raise a new generation. Hasn't worked for the Republicans in America, or the Democrats, actually, has it?
No.
They've just picked the same guy again.
Mind you, has it worked for the Labour Party over here? Really? I suppose you could argue Keir Starmer's new generation.
And most of his front bench are...
extent, but...
Ish, yeah.
Anyway, look, tomorrow... It's Holocaust Memorial Day, so we're going to remember those who lost their lives in the worst genocide in history.
But after the war, many people fought back against what happened. John and Jack's father, Boris Greinemann, may have been among them.
Yeah, so let's find out what's going on. John and Jack join us now. Good to see you both this morning. What can you tell us about your father and what you've discovered?
First of all, hi to my brother in Australia. It's amazing that we're speaking between Jerusalem, where I am, Melbourne, and you're in London, I assume. Right?
Yeah, we're in London. Yes, so we're spread across the globe like this. So what have you found out?
What have we found out? There's a lot of circumstantial evidence. One point you mentioned fighting Nazis. He fought Nazis during the war for years in the forests. So it wasn't just after the war. As my brother Sam said in the film, there was a war after the war. Jack and my experiences were very different. We're 15 years apart in age, 15 years older. So maybe Jack can add something, but he's putting together a book for the family now. And I've responded with creative efforts, written 2 novels based basically on my dad's story and my experience as a son of a former partisan. Jack, maybe you want to say something?
Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
Hi there. Yeah, so our father was from Belarus. He's from a very large family. He was actually one of 9 siblings. All his family were murdered in the Holocaust except for one brother. And the way they survived was by being in the forests, and they joined up with the partisans, the Soviet partisans, and they actually were involved in a Jewish-only group called Nakoma. And so in that way, they got through the war, and they were watchmakers by profession, and eventually they both came to Melbourne, Australia to set up new lives. And my dad was 53 when I was born, so I was brought up by a more elderly, quieted father compared to my older brother, John. And so it became quite a shock to me when I heard this family story that he had possibly been involved with some action against Nazi collaborators who had also come to Australia after the war. Perhaps my brother will tell you what it was like growing up when my father was a bit younger.
Well, I was wondering, John, what it's like, especially as a rabbi, to know. I mean, I don't know if you know the details, but did your father? Are you convinced he pursued Nazis? Did he kill Nazis? I mean, how do you feel about all of that?
My answer is yes. I think he did. I think he was a very intelligent man and quite tight-lipped. I mean, he was a warm, gentle father in my experience of him, but he didn't talk a lot. My mother did most of the talking for the two of them, and he was a very skilled craftsman. By the way, he had a very good relationship with the local police station, who would come to him to repair their watches, and after a while he connected his jewelry store after a couple of robberies with the police station. I grew up in a home which was a center for Holocaust survivors. It wasn't as if I'd heard nothing about the subject. Both my brother Sam and I heard a lot. My mother tongue, until I went to school in Australia, and by the way, it's Australia Day today, 26th of January, and I value very much the country I grew up in. We grew up in a home that was a gathering place for survivors. And my dad in the local community was something of a hero. They knew that he had fought back, that he'd been awarded medals by the Soviets for bravery, and they would invite him to speak every Holocaust Memorial Day. He wrote a lot about his experiences in the Yiddish paper. I learned to read Yiddish. I saw his picture in the paper, and I overheard, and this is maybe what stimulated Jack to devote himself and encourage me to dig further. I overheard conversations about Nazis in Australia as a child. They would close the door and they would sit in the next room. We also had, amongst the survivors, fairly famous people come to visit us in Melbourne. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but there was probably the greatest Yiddish poet in the 20th century, a gentleman called Sutzkever, who came to visit a couple of times. And he was a partisan who'd fled a ghetto, and my dad was instrumental in saving his life. This man was already known as a poet and flown to Moscow from the forest. And he was the first survivor of a ghetto to speak in Moscow publicly. He also escaped the Soviet Union, and he was the only one in that particular meeting who did not say, "Long live Stalin," and so on. So I have no doubt, even though he made very successful efforts in covering his tracks, and there's no conclusive proof, I have no doubt personally that he was involved in knocking off Nazis during the war, right after the war. And my first novel, Far Away From Where, deals with a character based on my dad called Bora, who is knocking off SS men, and in Australia as well. I think he went to Australia, unlike what the detective in the film says, to chase Nazis. He went to Australia to start a new life in what he thought was a good country. And I grew up hearing all the time from him how much he appreciated democracy and freedom in Australia. It nevertheless led me to choose to live in Israel and pursue my Jewish identity much more deeply.
Of course, if your father was a Nazi hunter and did successfully bring Nazis to justice, maybe even kill them, I guess it'll be very difficult to find out any more details, because it was very dangerous work. And frankly, it was very undercover as well, wasn't it? Jack?
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And the documentary explores that. It explores historical records, and the director, Danny Ben-Moshe, has gone to great lengths to research the story. And it's quite an interesting story how I actually came across the director. So we just happened to have beach houses in similar locations in Melbourne, and I just by chance met him at a gathering down here. I'm here now, and then we started a conversation, and it went from there. That was the origin of the documentary, a chance meeting with this director who actually happens to originally be from England.
Okay, look, sadly, we've got to leave it there because we're out of time, but it's fascinating to talk to both of you and nice to be able to reunite you across the airwaves.
One in Tel Aviv, one in Melbourne.
Yes,
We're in London. Lovely to see you today.
Thank you very much
For that
indeed.
reason, it increased our contact, which is wonderful.
Yeah, you
There you
must.
go.
No, well, you know, it's easy to do now. And by the way, happy Australia Day.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks both very much indeed. OK, time for a check on your weather this morning with Aidan.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. It's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers in the far north today, where it will be blustery. Sunny skies for most elsewhere. A perfectly pleasant winter's day. Now, outbreaks of rain overnight, clearing first thing, and then blue skies for many, especially England and Wales. Just some patchy cloud there for Northern England and Northern Ireland. The odd shower for the north of Northern Ireland, but it's really across central and northern Scotland where the bulk of the showers will be, particularly through the morning with the odd rumble of thunder, some hail, some sleet and snow over the hills as well. And it's going to feel cold in a gusty wind. But further south, with sunny skies and lighter winds, 9 or 10 Celsius, feeling perfectly pleasant. Now into the evening, we keep the clear skies for long enough across southern and southeastern parts, and with light winds to lead to a touch of frost by dawn. Elsewhere, we've got increasing cloud once again, especially across Wales, northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and outbreaks of rain and a wind turning up by dawn. So that will keep things milder in the north, but a chilly start further south. However, that's where the best of the sunshine will be first thing across the Midlands, East Anglia and southern England. Northern Scotland, meanwhile, sees some very strong winds during the morning on Saturday with 60, 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts and some heavy rain lingering across the far north, especially for Caithness, Sutherland and Lewis. Elsewhere, many places will be dry, fair amounts of cloud about, but feeling pleasant enough in any sunny spells.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm quite happy. I was
Well,
a bit upset.
I am upset. There's been a huge upset in the Australian Open. Paul Coit will be here with all the latest. That's next. You're watching Breakfast on GB News with Steve.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
7:30. Good morning to you.
Yes, and Paul Coit has joined us. Some very dismal news from down under.
Oh, it's not that dismal, is it?
Oh, I think it's dismal.
Is it really?
New talent on the rise, I say.
I said Novak Djokovic. What is it about Novak that you love so much, though?
Because he's a brilliant player.
Yeah.
And if you go and see him live in one of those, exhibition matches, he's funny, he's
Funny, is he?
great, he's really brilliant at what he does. And
Yeah.
all the other
Not
players
that
seem to like
brilliant.
him. Well,
Not
this
that
is
brilliant.
bad.
Well, Yannick Sinner, 22-year-old Italian. You know, it's the passing of the baton. There he is, Yannick. Look, that's the moment of celebration there as he beats Novak Djokovic. I mean, he was all over him at the start. 6-1 was the first set, 6-2 in the second, and you don't actually look at that and think how well Sinner's playing. You think there's got to be something wrong because Djokovic is a machine. So
6-3 in the fourth.
It was 6-3 in the fourth. So it went to a tie-break the third, and that was the moment. And when I was last in here and said, well, you know what? We know what Djokovic is like. He's probably going to now turn the screw and then we'll come back. But no, and young Yannick Sinner was fantastic. And also, it's almost like he's the kryptonite to the Superman of Djokovic, because 3 out of 4 times when Sinner's played him, he's only 22, he's won 3 out of those 4 games.
Oh, wow.
And interesting, he was doing an interview straight afterwards, the first time that they actually played. It was Sinner's coach that was saying to Djokovic after he beat him and said, well, could you give any hints to him? Could you help him? Is there anything? And apparently he said, well, yeah, he should do this and do this. So he's done that, and then he's beaten them the next 3 times. So probably Novak is now thinking that was the most stupid piece of advice I could have given. But it's the first time that Djokovic has lost in an Australian semi-final. Yes. He's won 10. He's won enough.
Oh, I know.
It's time to let go now, Anne, and search for a new player.
Well, Murray is out. Djokovic is out.
Yeah.
And obviously Federer isn't playing anymore.
That's right.
So maybe it is time to look to a new generation, I suppose.
I think so.
Have to start learning some new names.
So what I'll do is maybe we'll start auditioning new tennis players for you to get behind for Wimbledon.
Well,
Little
Sinner,
time, yeah.
It's Sinner. It's an easy name to remember. What's his first name?
Sainter.
The what?
Who? Saint or Sinner. That's his name.
Saint.
No, it's Yannick.
Yannick.
And he's Italian, and the Carota boys are going to be happy. The fellas that dress up as the Carrots will be ready for the final, which is happening on Sunday.
You like an Italian, don't you?
Well, anyone who's a good tennis player.
OK. Oh, yeah. Well, listen, I also should mention the football as well.
Oh, go on.
Tonight, FA Cup. Now, it's the magic of the FA Cup.
It is, as you
It's the
always
magic
say.
of the FA Cup. One of the great games in the FA Cup was back in 1981, which you're both far too young to remember. It was Spurs versus Manchester City. It was the 100th final, and they're playing tonight at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And when I talk about kryptonite, the weird thing is that Manchester City, probably the greatest club team in the world, cannot score at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. They've played 5 times and they just can't seem to. So everybody has a bogey side, and it's like Djokovic with Sinner. So that happens tonight. But I do have someone that actually played in that 81 game. Paul Miller, defender, winner of the FA Cup in 81 and 1982. Morning, Paul.
Good morning, Paul. How are you?
I'm very good. It's great to see you. Is it fair to say then that it's the kryptonite, then Spurs have this hoodoo over Manchester City? Is there something in it? And when you go on after that, could it actually affect them?
Well, I'd like to think we have. I just can't see Man City not scoring tonight. I mean, as you say, they've had 5 goes at it and they haven't. And they're the best team in the world. They're going to score. I can see lots of goals tonight, actually, the game. But, yeah, I mean, they've got to score tonight. But let's hope that we score more than them.
Tell me about... we've got James Maddison, though. It looks like he's going to be back. This is a player who's been out for 2 or 3 months. He's been the greatest signing, a lot of people have said, to Spurs, and it could be tonight. So do we think he's going to play this evening?
I think he will play, yes. He has to play, and we're short of creative midfield players, with a few that have gone to the Far East and Africa for the competitions there. So he has to play. He'll want to play. It's a big game. And when he played for us before he got injured, he made load of goals and chances for us. I think he's still top of the assist in the league. So we're desperate to want him to play, and yeah, I think he will, and I think it'll help us, hopefully get a victory. Man City must hate coming to our place at the moment.
Now, you personally, you've got 2 FA Cup winners' medals, you've got a UEFA Cup winners' medal. Do you have a gold disc for Aussie's dream? Because, I'm sure Anne and Stephen will remember Aussie's dream. Aussie's going to Wembley. His knees have gone all trembly. You and Chaz and Dave. Did you actually get a gold disc for that? Because it's probably the greatest football record, not unbiased, that's ever been made, Paul. Look at that.
We got a disc, and I don't know where it is, but we got a silver disc. So I think gold disc was like $500,000, silver disc $250,000, but I mean, it was a great time. I mean, yeah, it was unique for us, making a record with Chaz and Dave. And Chaz, we lost Chaz, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, God bless him. But they were so clever and unique. And it seemed to capture the nation as well, especially with Aussie, whose English wasn't the greatest at the time, with his little quote in there,
Which
in the
was?
cup for Tottenham. It was brilliant. Yeah, it was a great time.
In the Cup for Tottenham, I'll do it for you. And also the greatest FA Cup final still, arguably, 1981, that replay.
Yeah, I mean, it had all the symptoms. City and ourselves hadn't won for a few years, and big clubs and great times. And obviously, Ricky Villa's winning goal was still played every year, isn't it? When he picks the ball up in the halfway line and beats half the team. Ricky can't believe he still gets so much acclaim on it when he comes over 2 or 3 times a year. So it was a great time. But remember, in the cup final, I mean, I've grown up in the East End of London. You wanted to be a footballer, and they only had 2 live games a year then, Scotland, England, and the cup finals. So after the cup final was on from 8 till 6 at night, you went out in the street of a local park and tried to emulate your heroes. And the dream of playing the cup final is what we all wanted to achieve at the end of the day. And that's why we became footballers, to play in a cup final.
The picture there that we just saw, that was you on the right-hand side. I think you can see, not that you've changed a bit. Look at that. There we are. Look at that on the right.
Yeah.
There's Ricky Villa on the left, Tommy Caton there, and Graham Roberts in the middle, and a very young Paul Miller there on the right-hand side. Paul, what's the score going to be tonight? I'm sorry to ask you, but I've got to.
I think 3-2. I think we've got plenty of goals in store.
2? To Spurs, right?
To Spurs, of course.
Just got to make sure. I've just got to make sure.
I mean,
enjoy the game tonight, Paul. Thanks a lot for your time. It's great to see you.
Thank you later. Bye-bye.
You remember the song, don't you?
Yeah, give us that.
Aussie's going to
line, though.
in the Cup for Tottenham. I could do the whole song for you.
Seriously, the best football song there's ever been?
Of course it was.
Really?
Of course it was.
Well, better than that one with John Barnes in.
You could, yeah, that World in Motion. You could go through that. That was, but the Aussie Stream still. Do you remember it, Anne?
No.
Do you not?
Not at all. What year was that?
1981. I've still got the 7-inch. I'll bring it in for you tomorrow.
Pretending to be interested in sport, 81. There was no need to even pretend when I was 81. It was 83 when I started presenting programmes where I had to sort of profess an interest.
But musically, I mean, it's a wonderful piece of music. So you're not even thinking about the football. The music was wonderful.
Did you not do a 12-inch version?
Well, yes, I think there was. Yeah.
I used to always like buying a 12-inch.
Yeah.
because then you got the extra bit of,
Extra bit of
instrumental
blood.
side.
So you could sing as if you were actually
Sing
the lead
along.
vocalist.
I
Yeah.
had the 12-inch of Europe. Was it Europe?
The final countdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. That was Europe. That was a guy whose name was Joey Tempest. Now, do you think that was his real name?
Joey Tempest.
Joey Tempest from Norway. No.
Don't think so.
Great name, though.
Absolutely.
Lovely stuff, Paul. Thank you very much indeed. Anyone would think you were a Spurs fan listening to that.
Really?
Funny, that is.
We've got a Djokovic fan, a Spurs fan. It's your turn next, Stephen.
Let me think on it.
OK.
Thank you very much indeed. OK, lots more still to come. We're going to take you through the papers in a couple of minutes. Annie's so not impressed with the tennis. Don't go anywhere.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 7:42, time to go through the papers this morning with the editor of Spike, Tom Slater, and PR guru, Lara Fawcett.
You're an expert in that area.
I know, but I've been
turned into a
demoted.
guru.
No, guru's one up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is it?
It's fine, yeah. Oh, to be a guru.
Oh.
Yeah, anyone could be an expert these days. Tom, let's have a look at The Guardian, should we? And the EU is stockpiling drugs, apparently.
Yeah, so the EU has this plan to stockpile key medicines, and there's been concerns raised of what knock-on effects this could have for the NHS, given the fact that you've got 27 EU member states bargaining at that kind of volume, and so concerns that this is going to mean that in those kind of key medicine groups, let's talk about antibiotics, painkillers, even vaccines becoming an issue. This is something that I'd probably be more concerned about if it wasn't for the EU's pretty bad record of procurement. I mean, we all remember what happened with the vaccines, where they said that, you know, we're acting as one big block, therefore we're going to get a better deal and we're going to be able to move quickly. The opposite turned out to be the case. They had to move very, very slowly, whereas if you're dealing as one nation, you can actually move in a little bit more of a nimble fashion. But at the same time, I suppose it's an interesting turn on the part of the EU, which is they kind of want to constantly kind of demonstrate the fact that moving as one big block is necessarily going to be beneficial. But in practice, that's not always been the case, I dare say. So I wouldn't be too alarmed about this, but of course, anything where medicines are concerned, you want to be extra careful, don't you?
It certainly is more difficult to get hold of some medicines at the moment.
That's very true.
Yeah.
HRT?
I don't know. Is it really? Gosh, I mean that's worrying if you can't get the medicine you want, or if there's a med I'm taking at the moment. They can't get now. There's the dose I should be taking, so they've given me double the dose, and I have to split the tablet in two.
Yes.
And that's just an issue of literally just not being able to access the right amount, which is. It's silly, isn't it?
Mind you, the whole hold on big pharmaceutical companies, maybe if we had less medicines, we might all use our
medicines more carefully.
Exactly, because they cure one problem and then you have to go back for another.
Oh, yeah. Don't you find as you get older, your bedside table fills up with various different things you're always meant to take?
Getting older.
There's age things.
No, I said as you get older, not as you get old.
I have got one of those pill boxes.
Oh, no.
Me too, I have.
I love them.
Is that a sign of old age?
Yes. But I just take, all vitamins. I take a lot of vitamins. It's not medical. It's all natural, sort of lion's mane.
But
and all
that's
that.
it. I take a lot of vitamins too, and it's just the stack of stuff on my bedside table.
Are you good at swallowing? Are you good at swallowing them?
No, I hate it. I hate the whole ritual. But
I can literally do a handful and one gulp.
You're just a young filly, Laura.
Lara.
Last time you were on, you accused me of calling you an old bag.
You did? Oh, no, you didn't.
No, I didn't. I just implied it.
Okay.
Let's have a look at Dragon's Den. What have they been up to?
Oh, so Dragon's Den, what are they? They've had to pull an episode of Dragon's Den after it featured a controversial project that claimed to alleviate ME. The show saw investment in businesswoman Giselle Boxer's brand of ear seeds.
Ear seeds?
Which you now know about, which is something you put in your ear and it's supposed to be an alternative remedy.
Right.
And
Did
apparently
they invest in it?
Yes.
Yeah,
so
it's now been discredited so much they feel that they shouldn't feature it on Dragon's Den.
Yes, but also I think there's a bit of this whole reality show investment. I think there's a bit of weird stuff going on because the director of the Dragon, is he Stephen Bartlett?
Oh, yes.
His brother, he was on the board of directors of this ear company, and then he resigned from the board of directors, and now his brother Jason is on the board of directors.
Right.
So that seems to me a little bit underhand. So there's something odd going on.
There's a lot of snake oil out there, isn't there, with any of these?
Oh, yes.
But again, you would. There's often a lot of concern about what people are buying online and people seeing something on Facebook or whatever. But it seems like even the supposedly discerning investors at Dragon's Den can easily be won over by this kind of nonsense when it's presented to them. But
yeah, you've got to be careful. Do you know what? Someone I knew years and years ago, who was from New Zealand, but it's gone to South Korea, and came back and said, "Oh, I brought you some gifts," and there were face masks, and one was snake oil.
Did you put it on?
And the other one was horse fat.
Oh.
No, I did not put them on.
What, you mean you wore it as a face mask and then breathed
cream.
it in?
It was cream.
Oh,
you
I
rubbed
see,
it
that
in.
sort of mask.
And horse fat.
Well, I mean, it's oil, isn't it? It's fat and I agree.
Yeah.
No, I did not put it on. No.
Yuck, no.
Oh, it's disgusting.
But I think the principle, though, of the other thing is, should you try and treat ME naturally or pharmaceuticals? So, in a sense, there's no harm in trying alternative things. That's the other thing they're up in arms about. But then it makes you wonder, is there a drug to cure ME, and is the big pharmaceutical companies investing in Dragon's Den and across that someone is now putting forward an alternative? That might be the...
Well, yeah, I don't believe these conspiracy theories that farmers keep stuff away from us. I don't believe
Not farmers, big farmers, with a PH.
Well, yes, no, but I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Because I think they come up with a cure, they'd make a fortune. they make an absolute killing.
Have you heard that?
Yeah, because
somewhere-
then then you get side effects, and then you.
They've developed a vaccine now for the treatment, and they're trialling it in several different places in the world for the treatment of bowel cancer. And it's an injection. It's a series of injections, but apparently it is something that now targets the cancerous part.
You've got to be diagnosed.
You've got to be
first.
diagnosed with bowel cancer. You've got you've been scanned and they know where it is. But they then develop this. They tailor it for you, and they say not only does it at the moment looks as though it severely reduces the size of the cancerous tumour, but in some cases it could obliterate it. And they reckon it's going to be an absolute game changer in the treatment of bowel cancer, and that will be huge. We maybe ought to look at that a bit later.
Tom. Talking of sort of health matters, this is in the Daily Mail. Consultants, apparently NHS consultants, have turned down a pay deal which would see them earning an extra 20 grand a year, and they say it's not enough.
Yes, so obviously we've been preoccupied by the junior doctors' strikes, and I think most people had either taken their eyes off this or assumed it had been kind of quietly parked, but it was just because the British Medical Association were balloting their members. It came down to very fine margins. It was about 51-49 in the end, rejecting the pay deal. But as you say, a pay rise of £20,000 rejected. It's one of those things, isn't it, when you're talking about in those kinds of volumes of pay, it's very difficult for people to summon much sympathy, shall we say. One thing that is worth saying is that as of a couple of years ago, you had the BMA pointing out that in terms of real terms pay cuts in the health service, the consultants were amongst the most affected. There was about 30% real terms pay cuts since 2008 as a consequence of that. But again, it was one of those things that because of the fact they're earning between £90,000 and £120,000, roughly speaking, as they start, it's something which is a harder argument to land with the public as to why they deserve it. Of course, you're dealing in an international health marketplace. People can go elsewhere for pay, so you want the health service to be competitive. But given the fact that so often with strike action, particularly when you're talking about the public sector, so much of it relies on the goodwill of the public, them being on side for that to strengthen your negotiating position, it's that bit harder when you're dealing with professionals who, despite what might have happened to their pay packets in recent years, are at the much higher end of things.
So.
But that is a significant pay offer, isn't it? It really is.
Best part of 20%.
Yeah.
And they still turn it down. Heck. What about, let's talk sixth form, should we? Lara, this is in the Times this morning.
Yeah.
And who's getting more applications than Oxbridge and Eton?
Yeah. I think universities are destroying private education. It's so changed, and I can talk a bit of experience with this, having had the privilege of being privately educated. And I think back in my day, it was a very lovely leg up. It was a great leg up. And you look at all the Conservative government now, most of them are Etonians, etc., etc. Whereas nowadays, I think it's more of a disadvantage. I mean, my son went to private school, not Eton, really clever, 4 A-levels, maths, physics, and didn't get into Oxford, whereas his state counterparts would have done. Actually, in his case, he was delighted and went to Edinburgh, and it was brilliant. But it's funny, this will surprise people, and again, my husband would probably divorce me for saying this, but I actually think private education's had its day. I think it should be abolished. You wing that one in.
All right, why do you say that, having been privately educated yourself and privately educated your son?
Because it's changed. So there's 2 reasons.
Is that because it's no longer advantageous?
It's no longer advantageous. That is a very, very big reason. And B, I think the cost of it and the pressure it puts on people. So I know from the moment we got married, all my husband cared about was saving for the children's education. Every time we wanted to go on holiday, you can't go on holiday because got to pay the school fees, blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking, well, actually, maybe it would be nice to go on a sort of family educational cultural trip and go and educate them ourselves. And then, and I also think if the people who had money then, like in France, ploughed the money into the state system, then you'd have better schools and you'd know local people as well. So if you
but you raise a good point. I mean, though from the opposite angle, but saying it gives you a leg up. Well, there's something a bit perverse about that, isn't there? Those people who've got more money are already better off in society, giving their children a leg up.
Well, exactly.
Where the rest of us have to struggle on.
Well, exactly. So there's something wrong in that. So it's sort of, it doesn't work any which way. And I just think it would be lovely. This is from someone whose children went to boarding school. to have had my children at home, going to the local school, all involved with the local community. It's all so much sort of, rather than they get sent away to boarding school and then they don't know people in the local community. And then they're seen as the sort of poshos.
You need to go for the Paul McCartney version of schooling, don't you, where he sent his kids to local comprehensive schools, but when they got home to Paul McCartney's house with all his friends, with all his contacts, and clearly he and Linda worked on, having a family union and bringing their children up to do interesting things after school as well. And I must say, I've sort of come around to your way of thinking now. Private education has absolutely crippled me.
And imagine being in London with it. I mean, the competition, something really, no.
Do you reckon, Tom? Scrap it?
I'm not necessarily for scrapping it. I think the big thing is to make state education as good or better than private education. And I think there's been this big problem with, because obviously there's a question of funding, naturally, but there's also the question of sort of expectations. When you do see these schools, they're often free schools or academies, which have managed to kind of outcompete even the elite private schools. It's often because they're really imposing kind of very high standards. There's often a kind of sense that if you go to a state school, particularly if you're from a poor or working class background, the idea that you shouldn't be expected to do well, you shouldn't be expected to try and meet your expectations, that you're kind of put out to pasture from a very early age. And I think that's the thing that really needs to be tackled. I don't necessarily see abolishing private schools as the solution to that problem.
You need to abolish them. I think they're just becoming so pricey that an awful lot of families just can't.
But the trouble is, as long as they're there, you still have the pressures about if you think you could, and I don't know.
Oh, well, you raised a very interesting point about dropping a bombshell.
Sorry.
On this one. No, it's good. OK, Lara, Tom, thank you both very much indeed. We'll see you a little bit later on. And with that bombshell, we want your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.com.
Right now, let's find out what the weather has in store for all of us. Here's Aidan.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. It's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers in the far north today, where it will be blustery. Sunny skies for most elsewhere. A perfectly pleasant winter's day. Now, outbreaks of rain overnight, clearing first thing, and then blue skies for many, especially England and Wales. Just some patchy cloud there for Northern England and Northern Ireland. The odd shower for the north of Northern Ireland, but it's really across central and northern Scotland where the bulk of the showers will be, particularly through the morning, with the odd rumble of thunder, some hail, some sleet and snow over the hills as well. And it's going to feel cold in a gusty wind. But further south, with sunny skies and lighter winds, 9 or 10 Celsius, feeling perfectly pleasant. Now, into the evening, we keep the clear skies for long enough across southern and southeastern parts, and with light winds, to lead to a touch of frost by dawn. Elsewhere, we've got increasing cloud once again, especially across Wales, northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and outbreaks of rain and a wind turning up by dawn. So that'll keep things milder in the north, but a chilly start further south. However, that's where the best of the sunshine will be first thing across the Midlands, East Anglia and southern England. Northern Scotland, meanwhile, sees some very strong winds during the morning on Saturday, with 60-70 mile-per-hour wind gusts and some heavy rain lingering across the far north, especially for Caithness, Sutherland and Lewis. Elsewhere, many places will be dry, fair amounts of cloud about, but feeling pleasant enough in any sunny spells.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning to you. It is 8 o'clock on Friday, the 26th of January. Today,
Have blood on your hands. If you had just done your jobs properly, there's a very good chance my beautiful boy would be alive today.
the Attorney General set to review the sentence of Nottingham killer Valdo Calicani following claims from the victims' families that he got away with murder.
I'm Catherine Forster, political correspondent here in Westminster, where Victoria Prentice, the Attorney General, now needs to look at what's happened. She's got 28 days to decide whether to refer the case to the Court of Appeal.
Convicted murderer Kenneth Eugene Smith becomes the first death row inmate to be executed using nitrogen gas. That's in the state of Alabama.
The price of rent outside of the capital has increased to almost £1,300 a month. In London, it's double that.
And a new report reveals that children in the UK are some of the most addicted to social media apps in the world. We'll be debating that in a few moments' time, but I don't know how you're going to stop them.
No, I don't know. Paul's got your sport this morning?
We'll have to keep this between us because Anne's going to get very upset, so I don't really want to mention Novak Djokovic is out of the Australian Open.
It's gone.
Oh, dear.
She's furious.
I know she's furious. I'm trying to keep it on the lowdown. But anyway, Novak's out, Yannick Sinner is in the final, and England are having a bit of a tough time in India at the moment.
OK, let's catch up with the weather. Aidan McGibbon.
Following a turbulent week of weather, a drier weekend is expected for many of us, but not for all. Find the full details in the forecast coming up soon.
Morning to you. I'm Stephen Dixon.
And I'm Anne Diamond, and this is Breakfast on GB News.
Interesting, loads of you getting in touch on marriage, because it's down to below 50% apparently.
For the first time ever.
But loads of you who say you've been married for ages had cheap weddings.
We got married for 77 shillings and sixpence a week. That was the Royal Navy marriage allowance, and now we've been married 57 years, and that's from Valerie and Ian.
Yeah,
Good on you.
Kath in West Yorkshire, we've been married for a very happy 25 years. Wasn't a big affair, register office, went back to our local and had bacon, eggs and champagne. 130 quid the lot, including the dress.
Avi in Norwich, morning Avi, says, Dear Stephen and Anne, we've been married for 57 years. We adore each other and we're glad we made that promise. Our wedding didn't cost very much. I think that now so many girls think more about the wedding than the marriage.
Fiona in Scotland says, I've been married for 40 years, 16 and 17 when we moved in together, married at 19. Heck, that's young these days. Most of our friends have all been married the same amount of time. See, so it can work.
So what's putting people off? Clive in Chertsey, morning. Clive, he says, we got married in 1989. It cost me £35 in a registry office. We've now been married 35 years this year.
£1 a year.
Marriage is more than love. It's got to be friendship too.
Yeah, it's got to... I mean, I love it. Luke, I've been married for 12 years this year. Absolutely love my wife. If you're with the right person, it's a great institution. Everyone has their ups and downs, but if you're genuinely in love, you will get through it.
But Martin says, why would any man get married when your wife can decide she's not happy and walk away and take half your house, pension, car and savings? My advice to other men is don't get married. Yes, exactly.
And yet,
but if you're married, it's not your house, not your car, not your pension, your savings. When you get married, it's 50-50.
We see that John's been in touch and he contradicts himself, I think. It says women have been sold the feminist myth that career comes first, so everyone's working, right? But it says men don't get married because they don't want to lose their money and their assets if it doesn't work out. Well, if you're both working, then there's no argument to say it's not equally fair.
No, it's meant to be a partnership. Even if one is not working, it's still a partnership.
And there's always...
And you share, that's the idea, isn't it?
In every couple, one person earns more than the other, even if it's only by £1.
Yeah, exactly.
So you share and share alike.
Simon... morning, Simon, in Bedford, says, we've been married nearly 48 years and things change throughout the years and it is necessary to change and adapt to situations as they arrive. We've gone through periods of being virtually penniless to being comfortable. We do things together, but we also have our own interests where we come together at the end of the day. One thing is for sure, when our large family get together, it's always fun to watch her being so excited and clucking around like an old mother hen. I like that.
That's nice.
That's brilliant. That's
my mother does that.
Yeah, I do
Clucks
that
about
too.
like an old mother hen. It's lovely.
Yeah.
It is lovely. But no, don't forget, with all my worldly goods I thee endow.
Yeah, and you both say it.
So I'm all for that. Well, there you go, that's just me. But then I'm a hopeless romantic.
Yeah, but it's good to share. It makes you feel good.
Yeah.
And it's meant to be incredibly good for your mental health to be able to share your life with somebody. Yeah. Men last longer if they're married.
Oh, well, there you go.
I'm not sure it's the same for women.
I might live forever.
But men apparently last longer and they are usually more healthy if they're married.
Right.
Because they've got somebody else to look after them.
Well, that's true. Well,
to look out for their health.
Men
to
are
nag them to go to the doctor, that sort of thing.
Well, yes, that I can believe. Anyway, keep your thoughts coming through on that one this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, the Attorney General is going to review the sentencing of Valdo Kalakani. That's after the victims' families have criticised the Crown Prosecution Service.
Yes, they said there is blood on their hands after they put Kalakani in psychiatric hospital, more or less for life, rather than prison, following those terrible attacks in Nottingham.
Yeah, well, those 3 people lost their lives, including 2 students at the end of their first year at Nottingham University. Let's talk to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. I mean, it's been a pretty swift reaction to all of this. How likely is it that the Attorney General is going to refer these cases to a higher court?
Well, good morning, Stephen and Anne. That remains to be seen. Victoria Prentice is the Attorney General. She and her legal team can take up to 28 days to make a decision as to what to do next. if they decide that, in their opinion, and Victoria Prentice was a lawyer before she became an MP, that the sentence was too lenient, they can refer this to the Court of Appeal, where it will then be up to judges to decide what action should be taken, if any. But certainly there has been a big political reaction, incredibly emotional scenes yesterday, hearing the families of those 3 people horrifically killed back in June in Nottingham last year, saying how they feel that they have been massively let down by the system. Now, the Prime Minister was speaking yesterday in North Yorkshire. He talked of Valdo Calicone as a very dangerous individual, but didn't back calls for a public inquiry into perceived failings. Dame Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, has also been speaking. She's called for a government review into how the Crown Prosecution Service takes decisions and looks after, coordinates with victims' families, because it's now emerged that initially families were told that he would be charged with murder, and it was only some 5 months later that they were told with very little notice that that decision had been changed, that he was going to be charged instead with manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility because he was a paranoid schizophrenic. Now, Barnaby Webber's mother, Emma, said that they felt that they'd been rushed, hastened and railroaded into that, and that says he knew entirely that it was wrong, but he did it anyway. James Coates, that's the son of Ian Coates, the caretaker, said that this man has made a mockery of the system and has got away with murder. They feel they've been failed by the Crown Prosecution Service. They feel they haven't got justice. They also think there's blood on the hands of the police chief. That's what Emma Webber, said yesterday. Because the police, there was a warrant out for this man's arrest. There'd been violent assault on a police officer. He'd knocked down several doors in the past. There'd been issues and also failings of the NHS. He'd been sectioned 4 times. He'd been off his medication. He'd sort of fallen through the cracks of the NHS system. But, you know, the state has a duty to keep the public safe. And it's clear that without his medication, this man was a danger to society, but he was on the streets and he went on to make these horrific attacks.
OK, Catherine, for now, thank you.
And it's 9 minutes past 8. Now, a GB News People's Poll has found that only 20% of Britons support the Conservative Party. Interesting, but probably something we already suspected. So we asked, who should replace Rishi Sunak as leader when the time comes?
Well, the people have spoken and they've chosen absolutely nobody. Yes, none of the above came out on top with 51%. Now, the highest amongst the names is actually Nigel Farage, who, of course, isn't an MP and isn't even a member of the Conservative Party. Boris Johnson, who is probably still a member of the party but isn't an MP. Penny Mordaunt and Suella Braverman. Suella Braverman coming in at a whopping 2%.
Yeah, it's really low, isn't it? Academic and Professor of Politics Matt Goodwin joins us now. What do you make of these amazing results, Matt?
Yeah, well, there's 2 figures that stand out for me this morning. One is the Conservatives on 20%. That's a historic low. If that was replicated at the election, we're talking about a bigger wipeout than 1997. But as you rightly say, the second big statistic is this widespread disillusionment with potential successors to Rishi Sunak, 51% saying none of them. Now, to me, if the Conservative Party, it is a brand, think about it like a brand, well, it's got a very big brand problem because lots of people out there are saying, I don't really care who leads this party. I'm not really finding it appealing at all. And just lastly, if I was in number 10, the fact that Nigel Farage comes out at the top of this list would also perhaps give me some cause for concern because, as we know, Nigel Farage is not even currently an MP and, as far as I'm aware, is not a member of the Conservative Party. So this is all just very bad news for Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, it does leave you wondering what they can do with these sort of figures, though. I mean, looking at that, they've got to just hold their head in their hands, haven't they?
Well, there's a few things maybe they're going to be talking about doing this morning when they look over those poll numbers, and they will be looking at them. The Reform Party on 12%. We had another poll yesterday that had Reform on 13%. In this poll for GB News, we also asked voters, would you ever consider voting for the Reform Party? And 16% of the country say they would. Now, that would suggest to me that there's still a few points for Richard Tyson, his party, to squeeze. They might go up a little bit more. We've got some crunch by-elections coming up. What happens if Reform finish above the Conservatives? That's going to pile pressure on Rishi Sunak. What happens if Reform go up to 16, 17%? That's going to pile pressure on Rishi Sunak. What happens if Nigel Farage returns to the Reform Party? That's going to pile pressure on Rishi Sunak. So there's a really important dynamic emerging. Of course, it could go the other way, where Rishi Sunak could win back those disillusioned Conservatives who have gone to Reform. And by the way, that number's not small. 1 in 4 of the people who voted for Boris Johnson are now saying they're going to vote for Reform. So it is going to come down to this rumble on the right.
Well, which is fascinating, isn't it? Because how many people then, it's trying to work out how many people who are currently saying they'd vote Reform, at the end of the day, will chicken out. Because the idea, it's in effect, to vote for Keir Starmer.
Well, some of us, and I'm sure you do too, remember the 2015 election where we all thought those UKIP voters were going to chicken out. And actually what happened is the UK Independence Party walked away with 12.6% of the national vote, nearly 4 million votes. And of course, they only won that one seat in Clacton. But look, I mean, if Reform walk off with anything above 5%, I mean, it basically makes life incredibly difficult for Rishi Sunak, because don't forget, Labour are going to be making gains all over the place. They're going to be making gains in Scotland. On this current polling, by the way, every seat in the red wall goes back to the Labour Party. OK, so Labour's going to be making gains all over the place, London, university towns, north of the border. And so really, Rishi Sunak and his team only have one option, which is to try and win back as many of those disillusioned Boris Johnson voters, those 2019 Conservatives, as possible. And the top issue for them is immigration.
Yeah, although all they're talking about at the moment is tax cuts.
Well, the party's talking about tax cuts, but out there in the country, most Conservative voters, when we say, what's your biggest priority right now, they say, stop the boats, stop illegal migration. It's above even the cost of living crisis, which is why, of course, that Rwanda bill is so important for Rishi Sunak, and why he's going to be hoping that this summer, as the temperature starts to go up again, as the number of boats begins to increase, that this summer doesn't look like last summer and the one before it, because this is make or break now for Rishi Sunak. And let me just lastly say this. If the Conservative Party were to potentially be replaced by Reform in the national polls, if the Conservative Party were to fall to 20% in the national polls, what we are witnessing is the death of a political party. We're witnessing a party in terminal decline. And this is why I find these numbers so absolutely remarkable.
OK, Matt, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, no, you'll have a view on that at home.
Yeah, I bet you will.
Always do. Terminal decline.
Because if you consider that the scenario would be Labour get in to form a government, then you basically do ask, maybe people would have the courage then to say, well, I'm not going to stick with the Tories, we'll go to Reform. And that's when you actually get some movement going on in opposition. Yeah.
Possibly. Possibly. Those figures are going to be frightening for the government.
Well, let us know what you think. And do you think there's time for the Tories to do anything to rescue the situation? gbviews@gbnews.com.
I think I need some new glasses.
Your eyes are looking tired today.
They are. Do you know what? When you sort of think, oh, I think possibly.
Why? What's happening?
No, just I feel like I'm straining a little bit. It's a cost.
Go to get your eyes done. Well, there are all sorts of adverts for £6 glasses now.
Oh, no, these are varifocals.
Oh.
I've reached that age. Varifocal. So they'll cost hundreds of pounds. I could do without spending hundreds of pounds.
Well, you're going to have to. They're your eyes.
I'm going to have to. Oh,
and it's your business reading.
In the meantime, at 16 minutes past 8, let's squint my way through some of the other stories coming into the newsroom. And diplomats from Britain and Canada have suspended trade talks because of a row over meat and cheese exports. A government spokesperson said Britain will only negotiate deals that deliver for us. According to reports, the trade relationship with the North American country is now worse than before Brexit.
3 people have been arrested for allegedly posing as immigration lawyers, helping through false asylum claims in Manchester. The Home Office has revealed that the suspects, including a married couple, charged over £3,000 per client for fake documents. Number 10 says it'll be relentless in finding those abusing the immigration system for profit.
And shoplifting offences in England and Wales, this won't surprise you, at the highest level in 20 years. The Office for National Statistics says more than 400,000 offences were recorded in the year to September, up a third. Downing Street says ministers are looking at how to tackle the problem.
17 minutes past 8. Now, the Alabama death row inmate, Kenneth Eugene Smith, has become the first American to be, in fact, I think the first person in the world to be executed using nitrogen gas.
Yeah, now the state has called it the most painless and humane method of execution known to man.
And that is, as a witness described the historic moment as horrific and the worst thing he'd ever seen.
Well, earlier we spoke to former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administrations, Steve Gill.
You know, there were about 200 people executed across the states last year, most by lethal injection. And the irony about this particular one is that they tried to execute this particular guy. And again, we're looking 30 years after he murdered an innocent pastor's wife. He and another man were paid $1,000 each to kill her. They beat her and stabbed her over 8 or 9 times. And 30 years later, he's just now reaching justice. His co-partner was executed in 2010 by lethal injection. Now, Mr. Smith, they had tried to administer a lethal injection about 2 years ago and ended up jabbing him with the needle 3 or 4 times. At one point, asked him if he would clench his fist so that they could put the IV into his arm, and he refused, probably forcefully. So that did not work, and they've come back now and tried this, put the gas mask over his face, put this new nitrogen oxide into his lungs, and he passed away. The whole process was about 20 minutes.
Not a lot of sympathy there from Steve Gill over all of this. What I don't understand, there's a lot of this I don't understand. One of them is all these legal complaints saying, well, he's being used as a guinea pig, which, well, that's going to be the case with anything that's new, isn't it? And then you've got to try it out on a human.
What I don't
I'm not saying I agree with it, but...
What I don't understand is why they can't execute people, if that's what they want to do, in a much more agreeable manner. For instance, like the way Dignitas do assisted suicides, which is apparently incredibly peaceful and very straightforward and easy and quick.
Because even the lethal injection that they do in the States is not as pleasant as you may think.
So why can't they do it the Dignitas type way?
I don't know. But then even Steve Gill was saying, well, in some places they're even thinking about, you know, firing squad and saying, oh, that's terrible and that'll never happen. Well, actually, at least it's quick.
Whereas these horrible other alternative ways seem to be much longer than any of us would figure out and possibly very, very distressing. And I just think if you live in a state where it's legal to execute people who have done bad things, very bad things, why can't it just be a bit more humane?
Yes.
We people who sit in judgment of others and have found them guilty of terrible murders and things like that, we should at least be able to behave in a more dignified way.
Well, that's an argument. Some people would disagree with you.
Yes, I'm sure people will. People will want to see him suffer. Although the family spoke afterwards and they said, this doesn't bring our loved one back, the woman he murdered. This doesn't, you know, we can't, this isn't a day of joy, it's just a day of closure.
I think a lot of people in the States, I've seen this time, even when the Oklahoma bombing, Timothy McVeigh, when he was executed, and a lot of families saying, we expected this to feel more final at the end of it, and it doesn't.
No, but it doesn't.
And what, in a way, why would it? It's revenge, and that doesn't actually do you any good, ultimately. But anyway, we've not been through that, have we?
No, thank goodness.
OK, let's see what's happening weather-wise for you today. Here's Aidan.
Hello, good morning. It's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers in the far north today, where it will be blustery. Sunny skies for most elsewhere, a perfectly pleasant winter's day. Now, outbreaks of rain overnight, clearing first thing, and then blue skies for many, especially England and Wales. Just some patchy cloud there for northern England and Northern Ireland. The odd shower for the north of Northern Ireland, but it's really across central and northern Scotland where the bulk of the showers will be, particularly through the morning, with the odd rumble of thunder, some hail, some sleet and snow over the hills as well. And it's going to feel cold in a gusty wind. But further south, with sunny skies and lighter winds, 9 or 10 Celsius, feeling perfectly pleasant. Now into the evening, we keep the clear skies for long enough across southern and southeastern parts, and with light winds to lead to a touch of frost by dawn. Elsewhere, we've got increasing cloud once again, especially across Wales, northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and outbreaks of rain and a wind turning up by dawn. So that will keep things milder in the north, but a chilly start further south. However, that's where the best of the sunshine will be first thing across the Midlands, East Anglia and southern England. Northern Scotland, meanwhile, sees some very strong winds during the morning on Saturday, with 60-70 mile-per-hour wind gusts and some heavy rain lingering across the far north, especially for Caithness, Sutherland and Lewis. Elsewhere, many places will be dry, fair amounts of cloud about, but feeling pleasant enough in any sunny spells.
Thanks very much, Aidan. Oh dear, Djokovic has crashed out of the Australian Open. Paul Coyte will be here in just a couple of moments to take us through that.
It's time to burst the Westminster bubble. Come and join me in Scunthorpe in a People's Forum on the 1st of February to discuss how decisions made here affect your lives. Is the green ideology destroying jobs? Tickets, they're going like hot cross buns. Book now. GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now it's 8:27. A new report has revealed that children in the UK are some of the most addicted to social media apps in the world. TikTok's getting a lot of blame for this. Apparently they're on it for more than 2 hours a day.
I'll bet much more than 2 hours a day.
Yeah.
Well, according to this parental controls company, the figure has increased by 11% on the previous year. That's as the study also found that 50% of respondents specifically use TikTok. So we're asking, one of those questions that you sort of know the answer to already. Do our children spend far too much time on the apps?
Yes. Anyway, moving on.
Well, that's it.
Let's talk to social media expert Alan Stevens and family journalist and broadcaster Julie Cook. Morning to you. Julie,
morning.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think they use it too much. I see it in my own home. My daughter is 10. She would be on it 24/7 if I allowed her. I try to monitor it. I, put limits on it. I watch what she's looking for. But my worry, I read this report, and my worry isn't so much the time they spend on it, but more the influence it has. And I suppose that is related to time. But TikTok in particular, I actually wrote a piece this week about loads of tweens, so children aged 9 to 12, are obsessed with TikTok videos on skincare, and they will listen to anything anyone says on TikTok. They will put retinol on their face 20 years too early. They will put anything on, do anything these tween influencers say. And my worry is the absolute influence these people on TikTok have on our children.
But if that concerns you, why has your 9-year-old got a phone that can access TikTok?
Good point. She has a phone because she comes back on a bus from school. So I like to know where she is sort of at the end of the day. So that's why she has a phone. But yeah, in the evenings and the afternoon, I let her play a little game on it. She plays a game called Roblox. And also TikTok, is something they all watch. And that does sound like I'm a terrible parent letting her go on it. I'm well aware. Believe me, when I had my children, when they were young, I said, I'll never let them have a laptop. I'll never let them have a phone. I'll never let them go on social media. And unfortunately, the way the world is, and tech being so much a part of Generation Alpha, it kind of creeps up on you. And that sounds like I'm sort of saying, oh, well, it's not my fault, but it's just how it is for a lot of young people and for parents.
I mean, Alan, it's probably common sense, isn't it, to conclude that, yes, they spend too much time on it, but what can we parents do about it?
Oh, well, that's the tricky part, isn't it? And, of course, because, they're going to do something. I mean, when I was young, I was in my bedroom listening to Rolling Stones records, and my parents didn't know what
Look how you've turned out, Alan.
Exactly that. But I'm not so sure it's such a bad thing. I mean, there are some really good things on TikTok. I think it's how they're using it, and I think it's what they're looking at. And I think the thing is parents need to have an idea what their kids are looking at. Good point about not using the right sort of products on themselves and so on. But interestingly, there are some very educational things on it. They can learn a lot. They can learn to dance, certainly. And there are some... they've got to be doing something with their time. It's a case of knowing what they're doing. That's the important thing.
I tell you what worries me, Alan, about things that I have seen on occasion on things like TikTok, is it's all nonsense. I mean, you mentioned the dance thing there. I mean, there are how many hundreds of thousands of people doing dance moves and things?
True.
It's absolute pap, isn't it, to be honest?
Well, I know. I mean, we say that, of course, we're of a generation that might say that. But the thing is, a lot of people use TikTok as a search engine now. Half of the TikTok users in America use it as a search engine in preference to things like Google and YouTube. They find there are how-to videos, and they say those little video snippets that teach them how to do something are actually very useful.
Yeah, and they're also getting their news that way, aren't they, Julie? Does your 9-year-old get an idea of news just in little tiny snatches on TikTok?
They do. She was, coming across things. Again, I do monitor what she looks at. I sit in the same room as her. I don't let her sort of go off in another room and do it. But she saw things, for example, about the problems in Israel and Palestine. And we then had to have a conversation that was perhaps a little bit awkward. But also, in a way, I was sort of proud of her for showing an interest in a sort of political problem somewhere else in the world, albeit it very difficult to discuss. So yes, I mean, I agree that with our other guests that it does have its positives, and I agree it is there. It's their search engine of choice. You know, things that we use like Facebook or Google are seen as a bit old person for the young sort of generation alpha. This is their method of looking for things. So I'm not saying let's get rid of it completely. I'm just saying we really do need to monitor what they're watching and make sure it's age appropriate.
That makes it much more about parental control then, doesn't it? Doesn't that mean you've always got to be watching over your children's shoulder to see what they're doing, or confiscate the phone off them at certain times? Alan?
Yes, it does. I mean, the thing is, you should know what your kids are doing all the time. You can't monitor them 24/7. Of course you can't. But it's a case of knowing what they're doing. I mean, they've got to be doing something with their time. They're not watching television these days. They only watch television about 2 hours a week. So they're doing something. Parents need to know, and there's a responsibility on the social media companies themselves to clear off improper content, and that's very important too.
We just need to lock them in a room with a book. That's what I say. Alan, Julie, thank you very much indeed. I've no patience with it all. I'm turning into a right old...
No, but if you were a parent, you'd have to have patience with it all.
I wouldn't. They wouldn't have access to it.
It's something that they would, you see, wouldn't they?
Give them a tablet or a phone on their 16th birthday. Congratulations, here you go.
Yeah, it's easy.
Go and read a book. GB News contacted TikTok for comment, and whilst we wait for a response, the social media giants have previously said it does not allow children under the age of 13 onto its video sharing app.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
That's really effective.
Yeah.
Shall we catch up with the sport? Paul Coit is here.
Ready?
Well, it depends what for.
Well, you know what for.
I know what
The great,
Novak
glorious defeat of Novak Djokovic.
I'm so sorry, anyone watching who's a Djokovic fan. It's not good news.
There's not
It's only you, Anne. It is only you at the moment, I think.
Yeah.
But Novak.
It's not only me at all.
We're celebrating the upcoming generation, aren't we?
We are. That's what we're all about. We're all about the future of tennis, aren't we? That's what
we are, yeah.
Young Yannick Sinner, 22-year-old Italian. He's a sensation, and he's...
You're evil, you know. People think you're nice, but you're not.
I'm
You're
not
really
nice.
evil.
I'm a horrible, horrible person.
Yeah.
By the way, I was worried when you were saying about the tablet for the kids. I mean, you do mean one of these, don't you, for crying out loud?
Well, whatever keeps them quiet.
OK, very nice. Well, Yannick Sinner, then, he's probably just slightly past that, but he does have TikTok.
Yeah.
And he uses it very responsibly as well. Novak, probably a little too old for TikTok, but anyway, 6'1", 6'2", 6'7", 6'3", and I think we've got some of the game, I believe, as well, where we can see probably the final point of Yannick against Novak Djokovic. So he goes into the final, which is on Sunday, where he will play either Daniil Medvedev or Alexander Zverev. More V's in that game that I care to mention.
Yes.
Are we going to see a little clip of that? Yeah.
I felt like he was not feeling that great on court, so I just tried to keep pushing, and then in the third set, I had match point and I missed the forehand, but you know, this is tennis, and I just tried to be ready also for the next set, which I started off really well, and obviously the atmosphere was so great to play here, so
There we are. There's some of the game as well. I love it during the interviews because it's got to be tricky, hasn't it? Because it's the only sport where after every game in a major championship, they will then have to speak not only around the world to the crowd as well. Everybody seems to do it very well. There we are. This is coming towards the end of the game. But Sinner was just terrific. Look at him.
There you go.
Absolutely magnificent.
You say
Do you have a carrot now?
They always get pulled off to do an interview immediately afterwards, but frankly, all they ever say is, "Hello, then in the fourth set I did the..."
Exactly.
They're terribly analytical already. What the heck's going on? Any giggle about carrots?
No.
OK, so...
Sometimes it's like the boys' children.
Sorry. But when they do get pulled off, you're absolutely right. That is exactly what happened. So, but look at your face. But what I like about with the interviews as well is that Sinner, what he did very well there, now you behave yourself, what Sinner did very well was say the right thing to the crowd, and it's always the best thing to do.
I didn't quite hear
Well,
that.
he was talking about that, and then he did the thing where he said, well, you know, it's the crowd's been great, and obviously, you mentioned the crowd goes crazy. So, yeah, let's just hope that doesn't happen in the final, eh, Stephen?
What else is going on?
Well, there's a little bit of cricket as well.
Oh, excellent.
England are having a tough time in Ahmedabad, 299 for 5. England lead by 53. FA Cup fourth round. Oh dear. Thursday night, Bournemouth 5, Swansea 0. There we are. 3-0 up after 15 minutes. Spurs v Man City tonight.
Thank you very much, Paul.
It's my pleasure. I'm very sorry.
Don't get it on me.
Okay.
Yeah, just put it on me for the moment because this is ridiculous.
Even Alan was laughing, to be fair, in the back.
Keep Alan out of this. That's unfair. Poor Alan.
Oh, dear.
OK, we'll move on. It's 8:36.
We're in so much trouble
I know.
now. It wasn't
I
even
know.
our fault.
You've got to stay here. I can get out the door very swiftly.
I know, you're done now.
Shall we move on? Yes. Scientists say handwriting is better for your brain than typing. It's up in the papers next.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 8:40. Let's go through the papers this morning with the editor of Spike, Tom Slater, and PR guru, Lara Fawcett.
Right, Tom. We all know there's a terrible, terrible knife problem in Britain and in certain cities in particular. And various mayors sort of say they're going to try and get to grips with it. What has Britain's policing minister been saying?
So this comes on the back of the announcement from the Home Secretary earlier this week about the ban on zombie knives and machetes, which is coming through. So it's kind of in response to this, Chris Philp, the policing minister, was in the House of Commons, and he made the point that this isn't going to change things overnight. And obviously, given the scale of the problem, I think that should be obvious to anyone. There's been a 19% rise in knife point robberies, responsible for a large amount of the homicides that we've been seeing, particularly in places like London, particularly when you're talking about teenagers killing each other over absolutely nothing. This is the kind of weaponry that they're using. But also, I think one of the reasons it's not going to change things overnight is sometimes we can have a slightly superficial conversation about this, because we've clamped down on one form of knife. I mean, obviously, it would seem outrageous to most people. Why would you need to own a knife of this size for any other reason? But at the same time, it's not the availability of a zombie knife or machete.
No, I mean, you can do it with a bread knife, couldn't you? I mean, that's the trouble.
This is exactly it. And the other thing is, if you've got young people who are willing to illegally carry weapons in any stretch of the imagination, it's not as if they're going to be deterred from buying them on the black market or from other means and so on. I do think we often have a really shallow discussion about this. It's either we'll just ban the type of knife and then it will sort itself out, or you get into a discussion about the closure of youth centres as if someone was able to play table tennis the night before they fatally killed someone, they wouldn't have done it. I mean, it's the sort of thing where this is a much deeper sort of social problem. It involves poverty, it involves family structure, all these different things. But it does feel like we just have this very knee-jerk ban that it will go away.
But that's because it's such a fundamental underlying issue within certain socio-economic groups. But how do you even begin to tackle it? I was saying this yesterday. I wouldn't know where to start. I think and it will take a generation.
No, definitely, and it's worth saying that these things aren't easy, regardless of where you begin with this. But I think there's just been a kind of nervousness about talking about where this issue is going, where it's coming from. There's a kind of sense that it's slightly judgy to point out that in, say, single-parent households, which are also struggling financially, therefore you've got parents who are not only on their own but at work all the time, therefore no one's looking out for them. All of these things are kind of commonsensical, and it's not judgmental to point these things out, but there's this nervousness about talking about it.
But there's a lot of nervousness about talking about sensitive issues, which are becoming real society problems, aren't there? Haven't we got to have the courage to start talking about it without the fear of being called prejudiced or judgmental, as you say?
And I think we should turn this discussion on its head, because of the fact that, say, in London, not in places like Glasgow, which has had a big knife crime problem historically, but in places like London, it tends to be Afro-Caribbean kids, broadly speaking, not exclusively. There's a nervousness about talking about that, but also the primary victims of knife crime also happen to be Afro-Caribbean kids. So it does amount to a certain level of almost racist negligence if you refuse to talk about this issue because it makes you a bit nervous, or you're worried about about going there in terms of this discussion. But it's a real issue. We shouldn't get too alarmist about it, but any number of... When you're getting into a situation where stories, as we saw over Christmas, of young people, as I say, killing each other over nothing, when that starts to become the background noise of city life, something's gone horribly wrong.
I mean, these issues can be cleared up, can't they? And we've seen other... I think of New York, which had a terrible crime problem beyond belief at one point. And it was, in fact, I think it was Rudy Giuliani, who did it. He clamped down on it, and it changed the dynamic of the city.
Did he ban knives? What did he...
I don't know what he did. I can't remember what he did, but he absolutely did reverse the trend in crime.
You had the angels on the tube. On the method, whatever they call it, what do they call it in America?
I forget what the phrase was, but there was certainly this move towards much more proactive policing, because people act as if policing has no difference whatsoever. It's all root causes, it's all downstream. The fact of the matter is, when you've got people taking, say, knives or guns off the street, that is obviously a net positive. There's obviously always going to be questions about how do you do that, how do you make sure you're not infringing on people's rights. All of that is obviously really important, but there's obviously a role to play in terms of trying to take these dangerous weapons out of the circulation, definitely.
All right, let's move on to the Times, Lara, where the pen is mightier than the keyboard.
Oh, so sad, isn't it? I mean, you fall into two... I mean, I still write everything in a notebook. I still have a diary that I write in. I think handwriting is such an indication of people's personality, of what... I don't know, it's such a special thing, and a handwritten thank you letter...
it does mean more.
It does mean more. One of your presenters, Christine Hamilton, have you ever seen her writing? Amazing, the most beautiful, loopy writing, and it just... I always remember it. It's
I used to have nice handwriting. I hardly write a thing.
So that's exactly. That was the other thing I was going to say.
type
You stop using something, and you lose it. I sometimes find my hands really shaky if I try and write a letter sometimes.
But the interesting thing in the Times is this argument now, which is actually what I find. I could have told you this. That if you're making notes or whatever else, it goes into your brain more if you write it down.
Yeah. Very true.
When one of my children had some sort of learning problems at school, they brought in an expert. Sorry?
Only one.
Yeah, only one of them. Yeah, no, they all did sort of from time to time. But they brought in this handwriting expert to look at his handwriting, and they could tell a lot from the handwriting. They said if you improve the handwriting, you improve the child's performance, and it worked.
That is really interesting. What fascinates me is how does it work with your finger when you get sent something to sign and you have to sign it with your finger? Isn't it fascinating that it still looks like you're writing? I don't know why I find that fascinating, but I do.
Oh, you see, now I would have argued the opposite.
Me too. Mine
That it's
just looks
obvious.
like a
Mine just looks
scrawl.
like a weird scrawl.
Well, maybe that's because my writing's a weird
it's
scrawl
a weird
anyway.
Scrawl, yeah. That's fine.
And why is doctors' handwriting always so appalling too?
Yeah, is it just they're just trying to get through it as quickly as possible?
Probably,
I don't know,
yeah.
but
The art of handwriting, we shouldn't let it go.
certainly
really.
been lost.
Right, Nicola Sturgeon's in trouble with her WhatsApp messages.
Yes, so this is coming out of the Scottish COVID inquiry. So people might have remembered last week there was a big controversy over the fact that Nicola Sturgeon, various other leading SNP people, had deleted their WhatsApps. We might now be finding out why that is the case. One of her aides has kept her end of the WhatsApp messages. And there's a lot of effing and jeffing in it. No one will be surprised to find out that some of it was aimed towards Boris Johnson, who was branded an effing clown by Nicola Sturgeon when she was watching his press conferences. There's no Tory minister who seemingly didn't come in for some harsh criticism, shall we say, from Nicola Sturgeon. This is obviously the sort of superficial, silly, entertaining end of what's coming out of the COVID inquiry. It's obviously incredibly serious. One thing I do find interesting, though, is the fact that you see in these messages this kind of sense of moral superiority from Nicola Sturgeon. Oh, these comms are terrible, they're ruining things. And that was all the narrative throughout the pandemic. Scotland, they're so much more on the front foot. You've got England lagging behind.
We thought that, though, didn't we? I mean, it came across that way.
And yet, in the sort of final analysis, if you look at how England and Scotland fared, not a huge amount of different. If anything, in many respects, Scotland doing worse.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting looking back on that time where not only Nicola Sturgeon felt so superior in relation to Westminster, but also that was certainly the narrative in a lot of the media discussion. It doesn't look quite so enlightened now, I dare say. But
no. It's going to be an interesting one, this, but it does seem, it's Nicola Sturgeon and, frankly, the SNP just seems to be unravelling.
Yeah.
They certainly do.
So
Very
suddenly
quickly
as well.
Too. Lara, tell us about measles.
Oh, crikey. OK, it's the headlines, isn't it? I mean, you do... I hate to say I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm a vaccine sceptic. There's a difference. There's a difference. I do believe you hear about the negative headlines. The moment there's a death from measles, you hear about it, but you're not going to hear about all the people who've naturally survived it, like a lot of us did in the past. I remember my grandmother having measles. I thought she was really old at the time. She was probably younger than me. But I remember she was lying in a darkened room and she was ill. She was ill for a week, but she survived. But maybe everyone's immune systems were stronger then.
Or just different. I mean, I had scarlet fever as a child and I had a nasty rash, but I felt absolutely fine.
Whereas other
people are really ill with it.
Yes.
I think you do your research. I think on all these things you do your own research. There's books, like what is it, Turtles All the Way Up book or whatever. There's always books you can read and do your own research. But I do still think it's free choice. I wouldn't be pushing.
Over-vaccinated then?
Oh yeah, yes.
Do you really?
I do. I'm afraid. Read the Turtle book, Turtles All the Way Down. It's a good read.
I have everything going.
No,
Me too.
I think it's fantastic. I must say, I think the drop off in the MMR vaccinations is really concerning. Not least because that was the big, not just vaccine sceptical, but anti-vax sort of campaign. And it's worth remembering as well because these days when people talk about kind of anti-vax sentiment, they think, it's people getting online and reading things on dodgy Facebook pages or watching YouTube channels, whatever. That campaign against MMR was in the newspapers, it was in The Lancet.
It was a doctor saying it. And it's been completely discredited. He was wrong to say it, and his research was wrong, and there's nothing wrong with the MMR vaccine. And it's not just about your child, it's about the children around as well.
100%.
And in the case of rubella, it's about anyone you might infect who's pregnant and things like that. The thing that upsets me is that now they're saying there are more and more cases of measles. Doctors were saying this years ago, we knew the take-up was getting poorer and poorer, and we should have done some sort of a campaign 5, 7, maybe even 10 years ago to prevent the outbreak of measles that's happening now.
And there's also another element, some of the sensitivities we're talking about, because it does tend to be amongst certain demographics where that you have a higher rate of kind of vaccine scepticism. Sometimes it's also just the fact that there's a language barrier in terms of getting through to them. So there's things that can be done, but often, again, there's a sort of nervousness about, or a sense of inability about how to cut through to certain communities and to make the argument and to reassure people who might be otherwise sceptical of the medical authorities in a way that other people might not be. So but it certainly needs to be tackled because, as you say, it's a whole population issue if there's a sizable minority who, for whatever reason, are against.
Tell us about single-use vapes.
Yes, the government its consultation is taking place on the question of, partly this is to do with how they're going to implement this ban on cigarette smoking, which is pretty extreme, I dare say. But also this story in particular in Telegraph is about the single-use vapes ban, which I also do wonder if it's as clear-cut as they're making out, because the concern here is that children are vaping, which is true. You know, you talk to any parents of kids in school, there's a lot of talk about people constantly vaping, these single-use ones where you can just buy them in the shop for a few pounds and so on. It seems to be what's driving it. But there's a couple of things to say on that, one of which is it's still not legal for them to purchase these things. So if there's a problem with shops selling them to young people legally, then you should come down hard on that. I don't see why making it impossible for anyone to buy them is a particularly good idea. The other thing that is worth saying is, in terms of youth vaping, it is a problem. You don't want 14, 13-year-olds, even older, getting hooked on nicotine unnecessarily. But in the grand scheme of things, it's a relatively nice problem to have. Smoking amongst that age group has fallen off a cliff, and there's not really any evidence to suggest they're going from vaping to smoking in anywhere near like the sort of numbers that we're sort of concerned about. So I do worry that there's, particularly with this desire to clamp down on vaping, it just doesn't make a lot of sense, because in general, vaping's been great for health, because it's 95% safer at a conservative estimate.
The problem. I guess the problem with it is we don't know what the long-term effects of vaping are.
Of course we don't. And the banning single use, I mean, I get it, because they litter the streets. So that's a different argument to vaping, isn't it?
But then all sorts of
single
things
use
litter
as the
the
permanent
streets, you know.
ones. But with
Ban
all these
anything
things,
like
also, it's the leaky bucket thing. It's like going back to basics. Why do people have knives in the first place? Why do people need something in their hand, like a cigarette or a vape? You know, why do people need that? I mean, if one could go back and get to the sort of root of the problem. I mean, I carry my rosaries wherever I go. That's my... And I love that. That makes me feel secure. What else can people have that will give them the comfort blanket?
If it means that in that particular age group, smoking has fallen off the edge of a cliff, as you say, what about eating sweets and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Is that... Because if you're busy doing something vaping, maybe you're not eating sweets like we used to do as kids.
But you don't need to put anything in your mouth all the time anyway. I mean, sweets is bad, vape. I mean, you don't need to be having this oral stimulation
or something, don't they? So there you go. Has it caused less sweet eating?
Which
maybe.
Have we got time to learn about the cat?
No, we haven't.
Or teeth, even, on sweet eating.
No, we haven't got to. We've run out of time, you two.
Yeah.
But it's been good to see you both. Lara, thank you. Tom, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
We're back with all your top stories very shortly. But of course, you want to know what the weather's doing where you are today. So let's get all the details for you with Aidan McGivern.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. It's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers in the far north today, where it will be blustery. Sunny skies for most elsewhere, a perfectly pleasant winter's day. Now, outbreaks of rain overnight, clearing first thing, and then blue skies for many, especially England and Wales. Just some patchy cloud there for Northern England and Northern Ireland. The odd shower for the north of Northern Ireland, but it's really across central and northern Scotland where the bulk of the showers will be, particularly through the morning, with the odd rumble of thunder, some hail, some sleet and snow over the hills as well. And it's going to feel cold in a gusty wind. But further south, with sunny skies and lighter winds, 9 or 10 Celsius, feeling perfectly pleasant. Now, into the evening, we keep the clear skies for long enough across southern and southeastern parts, and with light winds to lead to a touch of frost by dawn. Elsewhere, we've got increasing cloud once again, especially across Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and outbreaks of rain and a wind turning up by dawn. So that will keep things milder in the north, but a chilly start further south. However, that's where the best of the sunshine will be first thing across the Midlands, East Anglia and southern England. Northern Scotland, meanwhile, sees some very strong winds during the morning on Saturday, with 60, 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts and some heavy rain lingering across the far north, especially for Caithness, Sutherland and Lewis. Elsewhere, many places will be dry, fair amounts of cloud about, but feeling pleasant enough in any sunny spells.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning to you. It's 9 o'clock on Friday, the 26th of January. Today.
Have blood on your hands. If you had just done your jobs properly, there's a very good chance my beautiful boy would be alive today.
The Attorney General said to review the sentence of Nottingham killer Valdo Calacane following claims from the victims' families that he got away with murder.
I'm Catherine Forster, political correspondent here in Westminster. The Attorney General now has a month to decide whether to refer this case to the Court of Appeal if she feels that the sentence was unduly lenient. I'll bring you more shortly.
It's the last Friday of the month, and it's payday for millions. With the cut to national insurance rates, will we notice more money in our pockets?
Convicted murderer Kenneth Smith becomes the first death row inmate to be executed using nitrogen gas. That happened in the state of Alabama.
And the price of rent outside of the capital increases to almost £1,300 a month, and London rents are almost twice that.
A new report today says children in the UK are some of the most addicted to social media apps in the world. So is it time to stop them scrolling?
But you will need to know about the weather. Here's Aidan.
Following a turbulent week of weather, a drier weekend is expected for many of us, but not for all. Find the full details in the forecast coming up soon.
Morning to you, I'm Stephen Dixon.
And I'm Anne Diamond, and this is Breakfast on GB News.
Well, let's start with the Attorney General, should we, who's going to be reviewing the sentence of Valdo Calacane. That's after the victims' families in Nottingham criticised the Crown Prosecution Service.
They said there's blood on their hands after they put Calacane in psychiatric hospital, hopefully for life, rather than prison, following the attacks in Nottingham.
Let's talk to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. So what options, Catherine, are on the table here?
Yes, so Victoria Prentice is the Attorney General. She and her legal team have got 4 weeks to review this case. If they feel that the sentence was in fact too lenient, as the families are arguing, she can then refer this case to the Court of Appeal. It will then be up to judges there to decide if a different sentencing should have been passed and to take it from there. So we don't know what will happen, but what is clear is there is huge anger from the families and indeed more broadly from the public about this case, because these 3 people killed brutally on a morning in June last year. They just happened to be out at the street on the streets. 2 19-year-old students, Barnaby Webber, Grace Kumar O'Malley, and Ian Coates, the caretaker, happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, their families feel that they have been massively let down, and by 3 organisations, the Crown Prosecution Service and the NHS and the police. Now, in terms of the Crown Prosecution Service, Emma Webber, Barnaby's mother, said yesterday that they had been given to understand that this man would be tried for murder. She said it was 5 months later they were presented effectively with a fait accompli and told that no, that was not the case, that the CPS had decided to try him for manslaughter instead on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Now, she says that she feels they were rushed, hastened and railroaded, that he knew entirely that it was wrong, but he did it anyway. And James Coates, the son of Ian, the caretaker, said this man has made a mockery of the system and has got away with murder. So real anger about the way the CPS treated the families. Dame Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, has come out and said that she feels this needs to be looked at. Real questions too for the police for their failure to arrest a man that had assaulted a police officer, and indeed for the NHS. He'd been sectioned several times, but he was still on the streets, not taking his medication. So huge questions going forward, and of course nothing can bring back these 3 dearly loved individuals so cruelly taken that day.
Catherine, thank you.
Now, I think we can cross live now to the Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equalities, Annalise Dodds, who I think joins us now.
Hello there, good morning.
Hello. I know we've got other things to talk about, but first of all, your reaction to that story from Nottingham of the families pleading for more justice, and it looks as though the Attorney General considering it very seriously indeed.
Oh, that line's gone, I'm afraid. Apologies for that. We'll see what we can sort out with that. I mean, to be honest, I think the issue here is a sense of justice. I mean, the idea that, and it must have been in the press. I wasn't aware of the fact that the charge had changed
from murder,
to
which was what you'd think it would fundamentally be.
I mean,
to manslaughter.
Ultimately, it would seem, even if convicted of murder, the sentence wouldn't be any different. Would probably still be in a psychiatric hospital and probably detained for life, one would imagine. However, it is that sense of justice and it being manslaughter, just when you look at what happened and those... I mean, especially... I hate to say it because it's not to disrespect the older gentleman who died, but that it pulls the heartstrings a little bit when you just see those two very young, innocent faces.
With their whole lives ahead of them.
With their whole lives ahead. Saying that, the caretaker who was also murdered was just about to start his retirement. So he had his retirement ahead of him, and that taken away. I mean, the whole thing is just utterly horrific.
If there's anything more obviously murder, and yet clearly the Crown Prosecution Service, because of his mental state, felt that a charge of manslaughter would be more appropriate. And we've just seen the image there of him literally driving that van towards people. Now, I understand, I've got to go and check it again now, that the people he tried to mow down, or he did mow down in the van, he was charged with attempted murder for them. So how can it be attempted murder for those three people and manslaughter for the people he actually murdered, if you like?
Makes no sense at all, does it?
I'll have to double check.
But anyway, the Attorney General looking at this, she can't make a decision other than to say this will be looked at the Court of Appeal. But I would be very surprised if that didn't happen. But we shall see. OK, coming up at 9:30, of course, it's Britain's Newsroom with Ellie and Pip.
Visions in pink.
Are
you celebrating the Barbie?
Here we are. We had a chat about it, didn't we?
Oh, we were on the phone for a good hour and a half, Ellie, talking about our wardrobe.
So what have you got for us this morning?
Well, we will be talking, of course, something else very contentious about that execution that took place overnight in Alabama, Kenneth Smith. What do people think about that? Is it torture? Is it humane? It took him 22 minutes to die, apparently. So we will be interested in people's thoughts.
Yeah, I'm also going to be talking about the death penalty in the States. How do people perceive it there? And has it changed at all?
They have sort of different views from us,
They do,
don't they?
yeah, and it does depend on what kind of state you're in. I mean, you can still, in some states, be executed by firing squad, would you believe? So we're going to be...
Yes, but in a sense, I mean, that was brought up by Steve Gill that we talked to. Well, at least it's quick and you know, it's pretty much instantaneous.
Is that better than struggling for 22 minutes?
And the electric chair, which people don't seem to have an issue with, is horrific.
Dreadful.
And it's the death penalty right in the first instance.
But I was thinking as well, people they pay to go to Dignitas for a peaceful death. Why can't that be done? Why is it done in a very different manner when it comes to...
Well, because they're convicted killers,
well, you mean
murderers.
They don't care whether it causes pain or not, or maybe they even feel a sense of revenge as part of the...
An eye for an eye.
Well, I mean, look, people have been getting in touch with that very thought, really. I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? If it was put to a referendum in the UK, the death penalty would be brought back.
Do you think it would?
Yeah.
What? Really?
Oh, yeah, yes, yeah. The polls all show that it would be brought back if it was put to a referendum, which is why they never have a...
No, they never do, because politicians won't do it.
No.
Yeah, well, we're going to have a really interesting discussion with a journalist based in the US. And on the other side of the show, we're going to be talking about the Oscar nominations, because there's quite a lot to talk about there. You know Ryan Gosling, who played Ken in the Barbie film? So he has received a nod for the Oscars for Best Supporting Actor as Ken. Barbie didn't receive a nomination, nor did the film's directors. There's been quite a lot of controversy about that.
Film's up for Best Picture, but Margot Robbie, she wasn't nominated for Best
Actress. What's the story behind that?
He will not forfeit his nomination, despite coming out with that statement saying it was really unfair, the women should have also been nominated.
He says he shouldn't do it. Why should he? I don't see why he should give
Well, apparently there's calls for him, well, it's like, if you feel so strongly about it, you should forfeit.
Yeah,
you should boycott.
But
and talking about
because of that, because of all the hoo-ha, I watched Barbie.
Did you?
I've never... 3 hours of total waste.
That you won't get back.
Yeah.
I loved it.
But it's a very polarising film.
Unimpressed.
Oh, no, Anne, it was lovely.
Well, on that controversy, we shall leave you and chat to you a little bit later on. Look forward to seeing you.
Thank you.
At 9:30, because we want to go back to Annalise Dodds, because hopefully we've got that line up and running again. Morning to you. I've got to ask you about the front of the eye, because it looks like we are going to get tax cuts on March the 6th. Basing us for the election, it may well be. But the Eye reporting this morning that Keir Starmer is being warned he must reverse these Tory tax cuts because you're just not going to be able to afford it, which begs the question, are you going to go into this election potentially saying, vote for us, we'll put your taxes up on day one?
Good morning again. I'm pleased to be back and that your engineers have sorted out the issue that you had. First of all, I would say, unfortunately, what we've seen under the Conservatives has not been tax cuts. We've actually seen tax rises, 25 Conservative tax rises just since the last general election. And the reality of the National Insurance so-called tax cut, it was actually just giving people back £2 of every extra £10 that they're going to be paying in tax. So I'm afraid this is a bit of a tax con under the Conservatives. Now, Labour's approach to taxation is different. We believe that people should be taxed fairly. We don't believe that working people should be paying the price for Conservative economic incompetence. What does that mean? Two things. First of all, getting our economy growing again. The levels of growth under previous Labour governments were far higher on average than what we've seen over recent years, and Labour set out that strong plan for growth. But secondly, it would be about taking different choices here. We believe that people live in our country, they should pay tax in our country.
But what is the growth plan that Labour's outlined so well? Because your growth plan up until this day has been this
frustratingly,
green plan,
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Ditched.
I think the engineers.
Oh, no. Oh, dear.
Oh,
so
I just had a good point to her.
Oh.
Because, no, I mean, look, and I may be wrong, but as I understand it, what we've been told in the last sort of 18 months or so is this green growth plan, the green economy plan, is the key for growth. And it looks like it's been delayed. They've already said they'd have to delay it if they won power. But it was all in the press last weekend that it was being scrapped. So what is the Labour plan for growth? Unfortunately, Annalise Dodds can't tell us because of the internet.
Yeah.
I don't think it's our engineers, actually. I just think it's the internet.
Yeah, sometimes it is. By the way, I've checked up on...
how frustrating.
I've checked up on that Nottingham situation with Kalakani, the man who mowed his way into 3 people, didn't kill them. He was charged with 3 counts of attempted murder. But when it came to the people he actually killed, not murder, but manslaughter.
But was he taken...
Riddle me that.
But was he... When he appeared in court, was it attempted murder? Or not? Because obviously he must have been charged with murder initially and then it was downgraded.
He admitted
to
3 charges of manslaughter by diminished responsibility and 3 of attempted murder.
Right. So
I don't understand why not killing somebody is attempted murder, but actually killing somebody is, in this case, manslaughter. It doesn't seem to make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, I don't know if there's such a crime as attempted manslaughter, but that's what it should be.
Well, the 2 things should at least equate, shouldn't they?
I mean, no wonder the families are so distraught.
And they feel they were sort of bullied, or actually just sort of frog-marched into agreeing the charges of manslaughter, or maybe they were told it was a fait accompli. But I think most people who ever remember those terrible killings having happened...
Awful.
How could it be anything other than murder?
I mean, 2 19-year-olds, Grace and Barnaby, and then the cleaner, the caretaker. Ian, his son has said that all the people involved in this and the CPS and the police and everyone else have got blood on their hands with this. And you can understand that sentiment, absolutely, with this. If lessons aren't learned, then there is no justice in the world.
Well, you get the feeling that those families won't leave it here. No. It's just awful for them that they have to keep going through it.
Certainly is. Look, don't go anywhere. I've got lots more coming up for you in just a moment.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Do you talk money
Yes.
and taxes and everything else? 'Cause
National insurance.
You might have more money in your pocket today if you're getting paid today.
But maybe
or
not
paid
that much
yesterday.
more.
No, you probably won't notice a huge amount of difference. But there's more tax cuts on the horizon in March, so we're sort of promised. Let's get all the lowdown from our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Good morning.
Good morning, morning.
If it all sounds too good to be true, is it?
It often is. Look, elections in the offing, tax cuts are in the offing, the old staple phrases are being wheeled out, aren't they? British jobs for British workers and all the rest of it. But this is what was announced at the autumn statement before Christmas, back in November. The Tories getting a tax cut in early in order to try and build us up to a feel-good factor before a general election. At least that's the theory. Let's have a look at what's actually happening today. It is sort of roughly payday for a lot of people who are paid monthly, and these national insurance cuts are coming in. I think we've got a graphic here, fingers and toes crossed. So national insurance, just to recap, that's paid by those earning over £12,570 a year. Then you pay national insurance. If you're self-employed, like many of us are, if you have annual profits over £6,725, then you pay national insurance. What the Tories have done, Jeremy Hunt's bringing in, as of January, so payday today, national insurance rate, the main rate falling from 12% to 10%. What does that mean? It means that average employee will save, just from that tax cut, drum roll, about £450 a year. But crucially, if you're self-employed, you're going to have to wait until April until these changes come in. So it's not huge money, but it's better than the proverbial kick in the teeth.
Well, it is, isn't it? Because the argument that you hear from opposition MPs is, of course, well, this is just £2 out of every 10 in extra tax that we're already paying.
That's right. These aren't huge tax cuts. The Tories have still overseen, under then Chancellor Sunak, now Chancellor Hunt. They've seen a rise in what we call the overall tax burden, the share of the total economy taken by tax. It's at a 70-year high, which many Tory MPs find really distasteful. And, you know, absolutely, Labour are completely right in the sense that because the Tories have frozen tax thresholds from 2022 all the way to 2028, they've frozen where you start paying tax at 12.5 grand a year, where the basic rate of income tax kicks in, where the top rate of income tax kicks in. That means as wages rise, as inflation rises, more and more people are dragged into higher tax brackets. Millions more, these so-called stealth taxes from fiscal drag. It's a major issue. And those stealth taxes, the increase in tax that they represent, that completely blows away this tax cut and possibly, I would say, even pretty much any tax cut that the Tories could bring in before the election. It doesn't bring me any pleasure to say that, but I'd rather be gloomy than wrong.
Yeah.
And yet Jeremy Hunt is saying there'll be more tax cuts, you know, in March, many more.
That's right, because, politics, they call it showbiz for ugly people, don't they? I'm not saying Jeremy Hunt's ugly or uglier than any other politician. All I'm saying is that they love the drama, the rabbit out of the hat. You know, just imagine if the Tories on the budget on 6th of March cut the basic rate of income tax from 20p to 18p, or cut corporation tax from 25% back to 19%. Yeah, we'd all go completely ballistic, wouldn't we? There'd be huge fanfare. There'd be, I'd be in the studio permanently talking about this stuff, even though that would be completely offset by fiscal drag, as Labour, rightly in this case, are pointing out.
Sounds so gloomy, doesn't it? Fiscal drag.
Yeah. It's a drag.
Thanks very
really
much
is.
indeed.
Yeah.
Now, let's tell you about the Alabama death row inmate Kenneth Smith, who's become the first person in the world to be executed using nitrogen gas.
The state has called it the most painless and humane method of execution known to man.
But a witness described the moment as horrific and the worst thing they had ever seen.
Well, earlier on we spoke to the former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administrations, Steve Gill.
You know, there were about 200 people executed across the states last year, most by lethal injection. And the irony about this particular one is that they tried to execute this particular guy. And again, we're looking 30 years after he murdered an innocent pastor's wife. He and another man were paid $1,000 each to kill her. They beat her and stabbed her over 8 or 9 times. And 30 years later, he's just now reaching justice. His co-partner was executed in 2010 by lethal injection. Now, Mr. Smith, they had tried to administer a lethal injection about 2 years ago and ended up jabbing him with the needle 3 or 4 times. At one point, asked him if he would clench his fist so that they could put the IV into his arm, and he refused, probably forcefully. So that did not work, and they've come back now and tried this, put the gas mask over his face, put this new nitrogen oxide into his lungs, and he passed away. The whole process was about 20 minutes.
Well, lots of people will be very divided over that.
Yeah, I have to. Lots of you getting in touch saying, why should their death be dignified? The people they killed didn't get that luxury.
No.
But it's about
us that do it, isn't it?
It's the whole idea of things not being an eye for an eye, really. But anyway, you're all entitled to your views, of course.
Yes, well, they'll be talking about that and lots more in Britain's newsroom coming up. We'll be back tomorrow at 6.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. It's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers in the far north today, where it will be blustery. Sunny skies for most elsewhere, a perfectly pleasant winter's day. Now, outbreaks of rain overnight, clearing first thing, and then blue skies for many, especially England and Wales. Just some patchy cloud there for Northern England and Northern Ireland. The odd shower for the north of Northern Ireland, but it's really across central and northern Scotland where the bulk of the showers will be, particularly through the morning, with the odd rumble of thunder, some hail, some sleet and snow over the hills as well. And it's going to feel cold in a gusty wind. But further south, with sunny skies and lighter winds, 9 or 10 Celsius, feeling perfectly pleasant. Now into the evening, we keep the clear skies for long enough across southern and southeastern parts, and with light winds to lead to a touch of frost by dawn. Elsewhere, we've got increasing cloud once again, especially across Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and outbreaks of rain and a wind turning up by dawn. So that'll keep things milder in the north, but a chilly start further south. However, that's where the best of the sunshine will be first thing across the Midlands, East Anglia and southern England. Northern Scotland, meanwhile, sees some very strong winds during the morning on Saturday, with 60-70 mile-per-hour wind gusts and some heavy rain lingering across the far north, especially for Caithness, Sutherland and Lewis. Elsewhere, many places will be dry, fair amounts of cloud about, but feeling pleasant enough in any sunny spells.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 9:30 on Friday, the 26th of January. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Pip Thompson and me, Ellie Costello.
Was justice served? The Attorney-General is set to review the sentence of Nottingham killer Valdo Calacane after claims from the victim's family that he got away with murder. Our political correspondent Catherine Forster has more.
Yes, Victoria Prentice, the Attorney General, now has 28 days to review this case and decide whether to refer it to the Court of Appeal for the judges to decide if indeed the sentence was too lenient. I'll bring you more shortly.
He represents the best of Great Britain. Those are the words of the leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, who has jumped to the Prime Minister's defence after a tough week in the office.
Nitrogen gas execution. Convicted murderer Kenneth Eugene Smith is the first person in the world to be put to death using nitrogen gas in the state of Alabama.
Bumper payday. It's the last Friday of the month, and that means payday for millions of us. And we're due to take home more money this month. But will we really see a difference?
Cool or cruel? German model and actress Claudia Schiffer stole the show at the film premiere of Argylle, or rather her cat did, controversially, in a backpack.
Yes, do let us know what you think about that. It seems to be dividing people, doesn't it? Is that a sensible way to carry a cat, or is that actually quite cruel? Do let us know what you think about that story, or indeed any of the other stories that we are talking about today. gbviews@gbnews.com. But before any of that, we're going to get the news review with Sophia.
Thanks, Ellie. Good morning. It's 9:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. The Attorney General will consider reviewing the sentence of Nottingham triple killer Valdo Calocane after receiving a complaint that it could be too lenient. He was given a hospital order yesterday and will likely spend the rest of his life in a high-security clinic. He was found to be suffering from a severe mental illness when he killed 3 people with a knife before attempting to kill 3 others. He'd stopped taking prescribed medication and could hear voices in his head. He'd also visited London's MI5 headquarters to ask them to stop controlling him. 3 psychiatrists agreed that a hospital order would be the best course of action. A prisoner in the US state of Alabama has become the first person to be executed with nitrogen gas. Kenneth Smith was convicted of murder in 1988 and had already survived a lethal injection when officials struggled to insert the needles into his body. Human rights groups and the United Nations had tried to prevent yesterday's execution, claiming the method was